My name is Amanda Luz Henning Santiago, and I am the editor at NYN Media. So I want to thank you all for being here and joining us today. And first, I would like to thank our sponsors for their continued support of NYN Media. So a big thank you goes out to Capel, Barnett, Madelon, and Schoenfield, BDO FMA, BHI, Citron Cooperman, Denham Wolf, CRF CPAs and Advisors, GMT Consulting, Lockton Companies LLC, Marks Paneth, and the Association of Nonprofit Specialists. Just a few housekeeping points to make. Please make sure if you are writing in the chat box that you send your message to everyone, not just panelists, so all attendees can see what you are saying. Please also submit any questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screens. Any questions submitted to the chat box may get lost in conversation and chat going. So be sure to submit those to the Q&A box, and each moderator will bring a few to each panel, time permitting, of course. Also, we will be giving out a raffle today to a random audience member. So be sure to be on the lookout for the email for a DoorDash gift card at the end of the program. I also wanted to mention that we are live streaming to our Facebook page, where closed captioning is available for anyone who prefers to watch the webinar with closed captioning. Now, let's get into our program today. First, we have Rich Miller Murphy, Executive Director of Marketing at the New York Blood Center Enterprises, who will be moderating our first panel on effective nonprofit leadership. Rich?
Thank you so much, Amanda, and welcome everyone to today's webinar. As you've heard from Amanda, our first panel is on effective nonprofit leadership and the return to work. We have a great panel here today. And we're going to start with just very brief introductions with Jennifer Jones Austin. Take it away, Jennifer.
Good afternoon, everyone. And I want to thank New York Nonprofit Press for having me here. I'm delighted to be here with you. I wear so many hats, so I have to remember where I am in this moment. I have the privilege of leading the FPWA, the Federation of Protestant Welfare Agencies. It's a nearly 100-year-old organization. In fact, it will be 100 in 2022. An organization founded to essentially be the voice for the most marginalized communities here in New York City at a time when services were doled out based on race and religion. And here we are 100 years later, still doing the very same thing. I also chair the New York City Racial Justice Commission and the New York City Board of Corrections.
Thanks so much, Jennifer. Charlotte?
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Charlotte Austin. I'm the CEO of MHA Westchester. It's a mental health organization serving Westchester, Rockland, Putnam, and Northern Bronx. We serve over 10,000 people every year in a wide array of behavioral health services. Our current challenge, biggest challenge, COVID-related, is an ever-increasing demand for services and an ever-shrinking workforce.
Thanks so much, Charlotte. Paula?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here this afternoon. I am the Director of HR Compliance Consulting for Lockton Companies. And Lockton is an insurance broker that helps clients manage business risks and employee benefits and has done that for 50-some years. My background is as a labor and employment attorney, and so I help clients stay in the know with HR-related needs. And so as you can imagine, COVID-19 takes a lot of my time.
Great, thanks so much. Andrea?
Hi, everyone. I'm Andrea Cantor, and I'm currently the head of not-for-profit banking at BHI. I've been a banker for a long time, but I've been covering the nonprofit sector for over 12 years. And I'm also a lifelong volunteer and have served on quite a few boards. And so my comments today are based both on my experiences with my clients as well as my own experiences in organizations I'm involved in.
Great, thanks, Andrea. And Melissa?
Hi, everybody. It's an honor and a privilege to be here today. I am the principal and director of GRF's Risk and Advisory Services. GRF CPAs, we are located in both Washington, D.C. and New York, and we serve over 700 nonprofits and associations annually across the United States and across the world. And we, primarily do a lot of audit and tax, but in addition, we help them with a lot of risk management. And so we've been helping our clients navigate the past few years, and happy to share some of the insights today.
Thank you so much, Melissa. So we want to jump right into the questions to give everyone an opportunity at the end of our panel to ask the questions that are on your mind. For me personally, at New York Blood Center, I've been here for 21 years. And I would say that this past 18 months, as for all of you, I'm sure, has been the most challenging for our organization and for me personally than ever. I think perhaps the only other group that could make that comment so strongly would be all of you HR functions and HR directors. We have so much to focus on to keep our employees safe and also to keep the clients that we serve, in our case, blood donors, safe, and to keep supplying our products or our services that are so much in demand. I like to say that it's never getting back to the new normal, right? I think a better phrase is the new reality. I don't believe we'll have normal as we know normal ever again. So let's jump into our first question. As you know, leadership, board leadership, executive leadership, your senior and middle management leadership, all of these areas are important and have been most important in the past 18 months. So how in this environment do we make sure that the staff and the board leadership are on the same page, that they're seeing the same challenges? And how do you make this happen given the stresses that all of us are under, especially if we have young kids? Luckily, I only have 14-year-old twins, but I know some of my co-parents at schools have first graders, kindergartners, preschoolers. So managing all these things at once is a challenge. So for this particular question about staff and board leadership being on the same page, we're going to start with Jennifer.
So what I'll tell you, just going back to the very first days of COVID, one of the first things that I sought to do as the leader of the organization was to begin by helping everybody to see the vulnerability that we all felt. And so I immediately engaged with board, helping them to appreciate what the staff was feeling and how vulnerable they felt, both personally and professionally, helping the board to understand that the staff immediately was asking, well, what does it mean if we shut down? How will I do my job? Will I be able to remain employed? Staff immediately begin seeing, friends, colleagues, family members become unemployed. And so there was a lot of vulnerability there, on top of wondering whether or not they would actually, be infected by the virus. And in turn, helping staff to understand what vulnerabilities the board members felt, both personally and in their personal pursuits, their personal/professional pursuits, but also in their responsibility to the organization. Were they equipped to be able to help us navigate these uncharted waters? So I really centered on transparency, but transparency with vulnerability in it. I thought it important for everybody to understand that nobody was confident in the moment, like 100% confident, that we all were going down a new path. And what we could do first and foremost was to be honest about it. Honest about the challenges presenting in our personal lives and in our professional lives, and then going the next step. So, one of the things that I've learned coming out of this is that it's okay to engage with your board and say, this is new. And I'm not really sure how we're going to navigate this, but this is what I'm thinking. And to turn to the staff and say, this is uncharted. These are the things that I'm thinking, and I'm bringing the board along with me, and the same thing to the board with staff. I'm bringing the staff along with me, and even giving them time to interface with one another. But it really was in those first days and still today, as a leader, being willing to, essentially to share those vulnerabilities felt by everybody in the space.
Thanks, Jennifer. And I think that that idea of being honest, if we don't know, say we don't know, right? These uncharted waters really provided both challenge and opportunity depending on your organization. So thank you. Charlotte?
So thank you, Jennifer. In addition to recognizing and appreciating all of the comments that you made and feeling similar, I'll go to kind of like the next level, which is not only recognizing the emotions, the fear, the anxiety, the unknown that people were experiencing, both our clients, our staff, and our board members, but talk about how we try to mitigate some of that. In addition to honesty and transparency, I think education and communication are key. I think the most important thing was to provide people with information and resources as quickly as possible. And we all know that things are extremely dynamic as they're related to COVID, and that would be true today, as much today as it was on day one. Whether you're talking about vaccines or testing or return to work, there are all sorts of feelings and reactions around that. But those can be tempered, I believe, and can be managed with education and communication. So the opportunity for us to use new ways of whether those were technology or increased opportunities for education with community, with our clients, with our board and staff, via our website, via community conversations, town hall meetings, disseminating policies. And I think really important to note is that you have to be decisive. You have to be proactive and anticipate things, knowing that you may make mistakes, right? And knowing that you may have to make mid-course corrections. And that goes back to the honesty and transparency about this is the direction we're going to go in based on the information we have today. As that unfolds, we will be flexible and nimble and able to change based on what we face going forward. So I think that all of those things combined help to manage those emotions and any kind of dissent that you might have across the spectrum of people that you're working with.
So thank you, Charlotte. I like your focus on honesty, transparency, education, communication, two of those also mentioned by Jennifer. Let me ask you, when did you believe that you had to pull together a group or a task force or some of your top leaders, maybe even a board member or two or three, to come up with kind of an integrated way to get these messages out? You said you have to do it fast and decisive. So did you actually establish a task force or something like that for the whole pandemic? And if so, who was on that task force and what was some of your first actions?
So for us, that was one of the first steps that we took. We formed a team that developed policies and procedures around everything from PPE to telehealth implementation. So those things needed to include our compliance and technology departments, our innovation, our facilities, safety, obviously human resources, pretty much my entire executive team, the operations people were represented, and then needed to update things and disseminate information on a regular basis. And we started to have more frequent contact with the board, updating them on things that we were doing based on what they were seeing in the media and in response to concerns that they had. And again, we communicated in ways that we hadn't typically. We developed a weekly wrap up where we sent out something with visuals and links for all of our staff and shared it with the board as well. We used social media, as I know many other people did, in a way we never did before, much more robust. I started having quarterly town halls. We even changed the way that we did our annual report. It's now called an impact report, and it talks much more about data and uses numbers and information to share our story, and more graphics and more details. So those are some of the examples of things that we did around communication and policy.
So I think the same question for Jennifer. Did you start, how often or how soon did you start with this kind of new ways of communication to your staff, to your board, to your clients?
Immediately. And what I found very interesting, frankly, was that I think our board being, engaged and immersed in their day-to-day with their own organizations, their families, there wasn't this immediate, like this call that came from the board chair or from board members. Okay, what can we do? It was really like, wait, I need to connect with you and tell you, like, we need to all come around the table together. Everybody was so busy trying to figure out their next move. And I realized I've got to bring the board to the table and begin engaging with them to kind of, frankly, set a set of expectations about how we're going to work together. That in this moment, I don't need you to essentially hover and, and get involved in operations. I don't need you to micromanage, which is sometimes the tendency, especially when you've got, challenges of the type that we're having. When you saw people, we're a service organization and a policy organization. So, if you're sitting in corporate America and you see people going without food, or you see them being displaced from their jobs, there is a tendency to want to get engaged, to do something, especially if you feel that your family's okay in the moment. And so I wanted to be very careful to let them know, we want your ideas. We need to run, talk about some big systems issues, but I don't need you calling me up saying, okay, how do we get food over here? Or, how do we make sure that, these people right here have enough cash in their pockets? I didn't need that. So I had to set the expectation. We're going to talk a little bit more about governance for how they would engage. And so I jumped on it right away.
Okay, great. Thanks, Charlotte and Jennifer. I want to give the other panelists an opportunity to also comment on what Jennifer said, on what Charlotte said. Here at the Blood Center, we started our COVID task force on March 2nd. That was our first notice to employees. Since that time, we've sent out 41 different notices over the past 18 months. All of them are on our intranet in a special section that says COVID-19 updates. And as Charlotte did, our CEO got on and did videos. We could track those videos, how many employees watched the videos. There was a way for employees to ask questions on those videos through the intranet. So it was kind of our internal way of keeping that communication among our staff. And our board members have the same access as our employees to our intranet, which ironically is called Pulse. So let's start with Paula. Can you add anything on to what Charlotte and Jennifer or myself have said? And then after Charlotte, after Paula, we'll go to Andrea, and after Andrea, we'll go to Melissa before we move on to our next subject.
Great, thank you. No, I would just echo the sentiments of communicating the unknown to your employees and even board members. That, I mean, we continue every day. You would think at this point there would be more answers to questions, but it seems like every day we have more questions than answers, especially as we await, more information about vaccine mandates and testing alternatives and things like that. So, I know there's many questions out there that while employers and nonprofits don't have answers to them, at least letting persons know that you're aware of those issues. And, once information's available, that will be communicated is very helpful. And, Rich, like you said, you have your intranet. We have at Locked In an internet page that's a coronavirus advisory practice page that has a whole host of resources about, answering FAQs and other helpful information in terms of what's going on right now.
Okay, thank you. Andrea?
Thanks. So it's been touched on a bit, but I want to add to this conversation that really best practices have never been more important, because organizations that were lackadaisical in terms of board meetings and attendance and efficient meeting management, they were starting at a disadvantage as we entered this crisis a year and a half ago. And so the organizations that I've seen handle everything best are those that, had regular meetings scheduled, had good lines of communication, and perhaps most importantly, had the good habit of walking away from meetings with decisive actions and things that were supposed to happen, where decisions actually got made at the meeting and then carried out afterwards. So, I really saw that, and every organization had to prioritize depending on what its mission is, but certainly the PPE challenges that were faced by really everybody in all industries at the beginning of this crisis, and then the cash flow challenges and what's the impact on fundraising of this disruption, and how can we get a PPP loan, and which banks are going to help us, and which banks are slow to turn around the applications, and who's going to help us here. So that flurry of activity that we really saw last spring, I think was best addressed by organizations who were organized and who jumped right into action, as we've heard really both Charlotte and Janet talk about, in terms of jumping into action and getting people communicating right away, getting on it right away.
Great. And Melissa?
Yeah, so great job, everybody. It's hard to really add much to that other than, through the lens of enterprise risk management. I know that's kind of a buzzword. And so those, you really are doing it right now, right? You jumped in, you started meeting. That's real similar to what in enterprise risk management, they talk about forming a risk council, right? And having that council meet, maybe they meet monthly or quarterly, and then that council then gains consensus on what are the top risks and what are our plans. That way it's not, and then from there it gets reported up to the board. So for those that have kind of pulled it together because of the pandemic, I encourage you to leave those meetings on your calendar. Continue to do that and talk about, the top risks to the organizations from, like you mentioned, through a strategic lens. And to Jennifer's point, getting the phone call and also putting together like a playbook of cadence, right? And not, getting the phone calls and having to deal with this, having some kind of playbook written out with likelihood and impact. So for example, someone saying this is catastrophic, well, define that. What is catastrophic? Because some organizations, for example, their computer systems can be down for 2 days. Others can be down for a month. So what is catastrophic for us? When do we need to freak out? And so now that, we've had some time maybe documenting these things, lessons learned, and putting them into a playbook for future scenarios would be my suggestion and takeaway, in addition to all these wonderful comments.
Great. Thank you, Melissa. So we do have a question from one of the attendees. And the question is posed to Charlotte. Charlotte, can you speak a little bit more about the impact report, which I think was your kind of recategorization of the annual report? So can you give a little more detail? I think you focused on, trying to have data and graphics and, what challenges you're facing, but can you just elaborate a little bit more about the impact report?
Sure, and I can put the link in the chat. It's mhawestchester.org is our website, and you can find our annual report listed there. It's going from a format of really just a couple of pie charts and bar graphs about the financials to something that really brings alive the information about the services and programs that we operate. So introducing stories, videos, data around how many people were reached, how many children were served in a certain capacity, how many meals we delivered in what used to be our drop-in center, which turned into a mobile food pantry, which was eventually delivering not only food and cleaning supplies and household supplies to people, but also acting as a check-in and a friendly visitor type of support. So those kind of things coming alive in a way that helps people, I think, both understand our mission, our work. It helps funders, it helps the community, and it actually helps our staff to recognize the impact that the work that they do on a daily basis is doing, especially under these circumstances. I think it's easy to lose sight of the hard, emotionally draining work that our folks were doing. And while we rotated very quickly from in-person services almost exclusively to almost completely virtual services, we still did have people on the ground from the very beginning, doctors, nurses, therapists, people supporting children and families. And so our risks were great in many cases. And it's a way to really bring, again, that story alive. But anybody can take a look at it if they want.
Great, thank you, Charlotte. Ironically, our organization, New York Blood Center, also used that same word, impact statement. And it took us a little while because we were focused on blood needs. We were focused on actually trying to figure out if people who recovered from COVID, if we could take their plasma because they would have already made antibodies. And then could we show that that plasma first was safe? And then if we could show it had an effect. So we didn't really focus on the impact statement at all for, I would say, the first 4 to 5 months. But after that, we immediately, because we didn't want our fundraising or development to suffer either, right? That question that was asked by Andrea right in the beginning about, what impact is this going to have? So we had to think about those things, but it wasn't the first thing that we thought about. Serving our hospitals, serving patients, and keeping our employees safe. Those were the three things that we focused on first. But again, that impact, I want to give Jennifer an opportunity before we move to the next question. Was there something similar to an impact statement that you also did at your organization?
We did not come up with a formal impact statement, but what we did do is we looked very closely at potential impact. We looked at the areas that could be negatively impacted the work that we had planned to do for the year, and then where we needed to have a greater impact than we had originally planned for. And we managed to those, to those concerns and to those goals. So where we knew that we needed to be an organization that in the moment was shifting from maybe policy initiatives that were centered on, just to put it bluntly, poverty liberation, we needed to center more on poverty relief, where we were trying to move the needle on efforts aimed at, I'll just give an example, addressing the federal poverty minimum wage. We really needed to center more on how do we ensure that in this moment that we dedicate our efforts on the federal front to being an active voice and present voice in passing the economic stimulus packages. So it was that kind of shifting, where does our impact need to be in this moment? And also letting our board know, we're gonna let up over here because we need to push harder over there. And so it was thinking about what we need to have impact in the moment and then moving in that spirit.
Thank you so much. So I'll just pause there for a minute before we move on. If anyone else would like to offer a final comment or some examples before we move to the next subject on governance. It's a pregnant pause. Okay, so our second question we're going to move to, and this, of course, is what was already mentioned, governance, board governance. how do you ensure during a pandemic, again, it never happened before, at least in our lifetimes. I don't think we were alive in the flu pandemic of 1918. But effective board governance, I think, is really the key to us being able to shift on the fly. We had to shift on the fly. We had to really think, what decisions do we have to make now in order for us to survive, in order for our employees to be safe, and in order for us to serve our clients and their changing needs. So we'll shift a little bit and we'll start with Charlotte, then we'll come back to Jennifer, and then we'll go in reverse order. So we'll start with Melissa when we have some comments, and then Andrea, and then Paula. So Charlotte, please.
So, my answer isn't going to be so different for this than the first question. I think, again, using technology and education and communication via new technologies, new avenues for this is key. I appreciated what Andrea mentioned about people who had a good structure in place ahead of the pandemic fared better than those who were scrambling and trying to put something together. We were fortunate that we had already, as a courtesy to board members, tried to make it easier for them to attend meetings by making the Zoom option possible. And so we had a little bit of a leg up on that, but we all became proficient in Zoom fairly quickly, right? But those kinds of things, encouraging people more to utilize the social media to get messages back and forth. And I think the engagement comment that Andrea made as well is important. What I found is that people who were previously not so very engaged became highly engaged, be it out of emotion, concern, extra time on their hands at home in isolation or quarantine. Who knows, different for everyone, but it was something that really brought our board very much to life. And having it is always being mindful of balancing the role of management versus the board, as Jennifer discussed. And my board president in particular was very skillful in helping the other board members maintain proper space for that.
I so much appreciate all that you said, Charlotte. And I really appreciate that question. When do we need to freak out? Years ago, not to get into a lengthy talk about this, but years ago, and Rich may have some awareness of this, I was diagnosed with leukemia and was given a 99% chance of survival. After going through the first round of chemotherapy, I needed consolidation chemotherapy, and then I needed a bone marrow transplant. Ultimately, I got a cord blood transplant. Now, I share all of that because when I learned that I needed a bone marrow transplant, and it was difficult to find a donor for me, I remember one of my doctors saying to me, I need you to trust me that I know what I'm doing here. I don't need you to second guess, and I don't need you to be anxious. And she went on and said, when I become anxious, that's when you should become anxious. But until I do, I just need you to trust and go along with me. And so I share that because that is essentially the same, kind of mindset, the same disposition that I sought to put forward with both my board and with my staff. Trust me that we don't need to be anxious until I tell you it's time for us to be anxious. I'm going to be upfront with you. I'm going to, we're going to look ahead. We're going to see what's happening in the moment and try to control as much as we can for what's coming, right? So articulating to the board what I perceive to be the greatest challenges that we would face, and doing it as best I could at the outset to give them a sense that I was managing and leading, and that what I really needed them to do was to be thought leaders with me, but not necessarily being overly anxious. That's what I found to be one of the most effective strategies in ensuring good board governance. Giving them, I don't want to say giving, but ensuring them that they had a role to play as a partner and a thought leader, but not that they had to come in and manage everything with me. I think that was, for me, very, very helpful. And it just, I always remember, it was like, don't panic until you see me panicking. If I'm in charge, if you put me in charge, as long as you look, it seems like I'm handling it, then don't get anxious.
Great. So Charlotte, when you mentioned technology and you had a little bit of a head start, my team had a head start also. We were trying to experiment pre-pandemic for people who lived more than an hour away. Could they only come into the office 2 or maybe 3 days a week? And could they telecommute, so to speak, pre-pandemic beforehand and still be productive? It's one of those really return to work questions that I think we all face now. We had already determined that it was working. So at least my team, who was using a different tool, not Zoom, not WebEx, they were using a Microsoft tool called Teams, they could communicate very, very easily. And then our group became the catalyst for the company going to Teams eventually over the next 6 months. So that technology that you talked about, how strong was that technology in MHA? Were you confident, or were you not anxious, to use Jennifer's word? Did you feel confident that you could rise to those new technology challenges quickly?
So I have to say, I'm very fortunate that we did have a strong infrastructure. We through some grants and careful planning, had spent 3 or 4 years implementing a number of new internal technology initiatives across all of our departments, and including telehealth. So that was already built. We have a very sophisticated IT lead and team. And we also had hired in the past couple of years a chief innovation officer who in January of 2020, we agreed to allow to work from South Carolina. So we had already started that as well. And she, was very dynamic and very able to respond to all of these things together with our IT team and the operations folks. So we did have a very good infrastructure. I'm somebody who invested a lot of resources in technology in anticipation of us needing to be competitive with other organizations and be a modern behavioral health agency, never anticipating that we would utilize it this way, but it really paid off in droves for us.
Great. So that subject is going to be covered in a later panel. So hold those thoughts. I don't believe you're on that panel, but hopefully, Charlotte, you can chime in for some questions for that panel or support through the chat function or through Q&A. Let's go to Melissa, offering your perspective on this board governance question and issue that we're discussing right now.
Yeah, so, risk oversight is the responsibility of the board. So obviously educating them on, what that cadence should look like. But one of the things we've been reminding our clients is that a sufficient level of risk discussions need to be documented in the minutes from a really just due diligence standpoint, and possibly any kind of litigation or look back. You don't want to be seen as negligent having not talked about significant items related to whether it's the pandemic or any major risks. So that's something that we're seeing, and we're trying to help our clients realize that. Now, obviously, you don't want too much risk information, so it's good to kind of have a methodology for coming up with what risks do we present to the board, and coming up with some type of playbook, like I said before, the impact scales, to say anything above this threshold we must communicate. That way, it takes some individual's opinion away, but it's more of kind of a methodology you can point to as to what brought that to the table. So yeah, that would be my input as far as that goes.
Great. And Andrea, do you have some thoughts or comments that you'd like to offer to the group?
Sorry, I do. Thank you. When I think about board governance, I think about accountability. And Jennifer referred earlier to not seeking micromanagement from the board partnership, especially during a crisis. And I couldn't agree more. I think it's really important for boards and executive staff to really stay in their lanes and know what the roles and responsibilities are for both. In a disaster or crisis, there are going to be some decisions that need to be made quickly. So you certainly want a nimble board that if their vote is required, that they can come together, get a quorum, get it done quickly, especially with these technology platforms where there's no excuse for not coming to a meeting unless it conflicts with something really important in your day job. But if you've got a board meeting and you need to come together for a vote, it's a lot easier to show up when you don't have to sit in traffic and you've got these platforms. The other thing that I heard Jennifer talking about earlier is really about confidence. It's about trusting your leadership and having confidence that they know what they're telling you. They know they're telling you the right information, and have confidence and stay calm under pressure. If your leader is calm under pressure, then you should be too. And I thought that was great advice.
Great. Thank you, Andrea. And Paula, would you like to comment on the subject of board governance?
Sure. Just quickly adding on with what Jennifer said about trying to avoid panic and anxiety. I think even in this era of so many unknowns, just knowing what alternatives and options there are in advance, even though we don't know exactly what we may have to do in the future, just knowing what's out there and being prepared can help alleviate some of that.
Great. So I think board governance, again, is one of those really important issues. I like to circle back to Jennifer and as well as the comment about confidence and trust, how they're linked together. And that kind of comment about staying in your lane. It's hard for us sometimes, right, to stay in our lanes. We have an organization that everybody likes to comment about everything. And it helps if you hold your comments and at least perhaps share them with the person responsible for the area rather than muddying the waters. And it's difficult to do. We're all human. We all want to put in our 2 cents about everything. But when you have a crisis, it's important that the people who have that responsibility, regulatory, risk management, HR, obviously the CEO dealing with the board, those things have to be respected. So we'll pause again after we move on to question number 3. Does anyone want to add anything more to the governance topic?
If I may just add, and I'm really appreciating everyone's comments and thoughts on this, and I feel like I'm learning in the moment. And so I really appreciate all that you're sharing. One of the things that we don't, I believe, center enough on when it comes to board governance is how to ready ourselves for the storms that are certain to come. Our boards, our boards are in turn as board members. Sometimes we're looking at the leaders of the institutions and we're just kind of moving along and, letting things happen as they may. And one of the things that I've come to appreciate through this crisis and other crises, frankly, is that you're going to show up the way you've been trained to show up or the way that you've been engaging. Some people will become more engaged, but they're going in a crisis. You often bring, your whole self to it, and whatever your whole self is before the crisis, that's what's going to show up in the moment. And so if you're somebody who's steady and engaged, you're going to be steady and engaged in the crisis. It may go to another level of steadiness and engagement, but if you're somebody who is anxious all the time and is, always seeing the problems rather than the potential solutions, then that's how you're going to show up in the crisis. And so there's work that we need to do to essentially, develop boards as well as staff, in the good times to prepare for the crisis. My dad was a minister and he used to say, everybody goes through storms. You're either in a storm, coming out of one, or about to go through one. And the best way to get through the storm is to prepare for it. We know they're coming, so we just need to do the work to prepare for them.
Thank you, Jennifer. Okay, so let's move on to our third question before we open everything up to questions from the participants viewing today. And that question is, what kind of checks and balances need to be in place for nonprofits, and not just to survive, and this goes to your immediate past comment, Jennifer, but to thrive in the months ahead. Again, I love the analogy of the storms. We've had a lot of storms in New York City. We started with 9/11 20 years ago. That was a gigantic storm. What did we learn? Question. The second storm, Sandy, oh my gosh, that was another giant storm. What did we learn? Did we go back and test our critical systems or not? And of course, the storm that we're hopefully going to get out of soon. I think the variant threw that storm into an extended storm, but I think we all see a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel. And the pandemic probably has been the most challenging storm, not for New York, but for the country and the world. So back to checks and balances in place for us. And we'll start again with Jennifer. Thanks.
So one of the things that we did early on was to look at our portfolio of programming and and policy initiatives, legislative items, and then walk that against our budgeting, looking at where we might see slippage or falling off. Very early on, I would say, let's see, the pandemic began in March. It was somewhere around May where we began looking at our budget and doing like what would have happened in late June, a mid-year budget reconciliation, taking a look at the things that we needed to get done, where we might have to shift resources, where we could possibly, where we should have anticipated a possible drop in revenues, and then planning accordingly, and doing that with even looking at our staff. How could we keep everybody fully, employed, and how long could we do that? And then when might we have to make adjustments, and actually messaging that sooner rather than later to provide for some stability, emotional as well as financial stability, so people knew how we were thinking about these issues. We told our staff in March, we know that at least through October, we've got you covered, right? So we don't need you to worry about that. We just need you to do your work. We gave them updates as we went through that. So I guess the first checks and balances is getting a sense when you're like in the beginning of the storm. What are the possible things that might go awry, might jump off? Where can you expect to possibly lose revenues? What are the programs that need to rise up and take front and center? And then making those adjustments as necessary.
I agree, making those adjustments as necessary. At the blood center, can you imagine if your hospitals within 1 week cut all their elective surgeries and dropped your demand for your main source of revenue in 1 week? So think about that. That check and balance was a big one. Again, I think your transparency of outlining what and how you could get by and for how long is a very important thing for the employees. We were considering whether or not we offered people voluntary furloughs with a guarantee to come back in 4 months with maybe a slight bonus or something, because we're wondering immediately, well, how could we make the payroll in the next month or 2 or 3? So I agree that being transparent, honest, give your employees some sense of stability for as long as you can. And then the key thing, updating them on a regular basis. Charlotte.
So I think a couple of things that are going to be key going forward have to do with monitoring quality and employee satisfaction. Those are things that are more challenging in a remote environment, and we are looking at a hybrid model going forward of some staff working fully remotely, some fully in person, and some a hybrid. So doing those things, I think, requires, again, technology. One of the things that I operate best on is concrete information. I don't like assumptions. I don't like drawing conclusions based on misinformation or feelings. I like to measure analyze, correct, and repeat. And I think that having the collection of data and information in whatever form that takes, and constantly using that to inform your policies and your practices is going to be key going forward in a way that it has never been before, because you don't have the same controls, you don't have the same visual or proximity to your employees to be able to provide that kind of leadership and management. It has to be done from a distance. And so those, I think, are really key important factors.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. So let's start with the additional comments and feedback, this time from Andrea. You are always in the middle, so let's give you the opportunity to comment first, and then we'll go to Paula and Melissa.
Thanks. I think that once organizations have gotten through the initial crisis of PPE and urgent cash flow to survive those kinds of disruptions, I think that the pandemic has presented an opportunity for organizations to be more thoughtful about how they are going to thrive going forward. And Charlotte just raised, for example, the employee experience, which the media has covered so well, both in the not-for-profit sector and in all sectors, in all industries. The employee experience has really changed. Employee perspectives have changed. And for organizations to think through how they can meet the specific needs of their employees to keep them engaged and productive. At the same time, I think for nonprofits in particular, thinking through, are there certain programs that have been affected by the pandemic in a way that makes them more in demand or less in demand? Are there programmatic priorities that need to be shifted as a result and in response to the pandemic? And also for the future sustainability, of the organization itself. Is this an opportunity to reconsider a program that just isn't working and was allowed to limp along, but now maybe some hard decisions need to be made, or maybe there are new programs to introduce. So I do think that once the urgent crisis is under control, organizations really can think strategically about, okay, we got through the worst of it, now what? And how do we go forward with strength?
Great. Paula.
Sure. So on the HR side of things, I mean, we've certainly seen how resilient our employees are. I mean, there were positions that you would never have thought you could perform your job perhaps by at home remotely, and people have stepped up to the task and been able to do so. I know, Rich, at the outset you talked about getting back to normal, and I mean there really will probably never be that normal that we knew in early 2020. And so really the hybrid employee approach is something a lot of employers are looking at. And I believe, let's see, maybe it was Melissa, I think, that mentioned, or not Melissa, I apologize, that mentioned needing data and making informed decisions based off data. And one thing that we do at Lockton is pulse surveys, where we'll ask our clients, how are you handling this issue? Because everybody wants to know, what are others doing in the industries to make sure that they're competitive and keeping up with each other. And so that's one tool that we use and get those results back out to folks so that you do know what else is going on in the industry or particular area that can be helpful when you're making those types of decisions.
Great, thanks, Paula. And Melissa, and then we'll try to reach out to the participants. So we only have about 5 more minutes. So if you do have a question, please put it in the Q&A box. And with that, Melissa, can you offer some comments on that idea of checks and balances?
Yeah, so checks and balances, and I know Jennifer already mentioned the budget, but really, we talk a lot about in the ERM world looking like also a risk-based budget. So if if a certain risk grew this year, like cyber risk, then I would maybe correlate that I would expect to see that budget increase. Or if talent management and retaining that talent is a big risk or it's part of our strategy, would that not affect our budget? So, and if we're not seeing that, then maybe we're not connecting the dots, and that's just a good check and balance there. Also, another one is, a lot of times we look at key performance indicators, and that's great. But again, talking about risk, is there a key risk indicator that we need to elevate? For example, turnover, staff turnover, or open positions. Historically, maybe HR might have sat on that, but maybe we need to rise it, bring it up higher. Maybe the board wants to keep an eye on that, so that way we can address things more timely. So that's another thing to be thinking. What are some of the key risk indicators we could be monitoring? And lastly, when trying to implement any kind of risk management, sometimes we'll hear, oh, risk isn't my responsibility, right? So really having risk be part of the job description today, really holding folks accountable for risk within their department. They are risk owners as well. And so that accountability, I think, is a real important check and balance as well. Thank you, everybody.
Great. I love the idea of measure, analyze, correct, repeat. Measure, analyze, correct, repeat. Wow. I mean, that is the cycle of management, right? We're using, especially when you measure and get data, I love the idea of not going with feelings. Sure, we all have a gut. And sometimes, depending on how long we've been in an industry, our gut might be pretty predictable. But data is always going to trump gut. So I think that's a great thing for us to take away from this particular section on checks and balances.
Not bad for a social worker.
So I think we can open the floor up to some questions. I have one question coming in. Again, the same idea of the impact statement. We actually have two. Where could I go to learn more about impact statements, and how or who could I rely on to help me put an impact statement together? And whoever wants to take a stab at that, please feel free.
Well, I did talk about our impact report, so I can speak to our process. We have some very talented people in our development department who do communications and prepare this report. And it was just our internal staff, really. We took it away from subbing anything out and doing it internally, and just really using the data that we collected. It wasn't anything too sophisticated. It was more creativity and graphic design than anything else. And if you have data, you probably could find somebody to just sub out a little project for and not spend too much money. But I'd be happy to, if anybody wants to reach out, I'd be happy to, give you some resources. It's again, it's on our website. It's the impactreport.com, or it's in the chat there. I think, it's pretty self-explanatory, and it's a nice process.
Yeah, I think that when you go to your existing employees, how often do we sometimes think that our own employees don't have the information? If we brainstorm even maybe an hour, it's really great to brainstorm on Zoom, because you can just say that the subject is impact statement, give a little descriptor of what it is, and then ask people to give you their feedback. If you do have a valued partner that you work with the outside, after your employees make suggestions, then run it by your outside experts and let them fine tune it and give you more information. But I'm a very big believer in impact statements as well. That's what we do in nonprofits. We try to make an impact. So I think that word is probably a really important word to take out from this overall session. I'll just say some other things. I'm just going to mention a whole bunch of words for the panel and for the participants. If you haven't focused on these words, please take those as a take back to your employees or to your board. I'll start with the measure, analyze, correct, repeat, going to the word engagement, pivot, honesty, transparency, education, communication, accountability, employee surveys and staff satisfaction, portfolio or priorities, and optimizing what those should be now, sustainability, I love the confidence and trust from Jennifer. I love the KPI versus the KRI, key risk indicators. Of course, budget, how budget connects to those priorities of your portfolio or your overall, what you're focusing on in your nonprofit. And again, readiness for storms. We should have been ready after 9/11. We should have been ready after Sandy. And after this gets to be a manageable pandemic, hopefully we will be much better for whatever the next storm is. So we're going to end with one 30-second lead in or summary from each person. And we'll go again in the order of the program that was shown. So we'll start with Jennifer, Charlotte, Paula, Andrea, and Melissa. Because we are time limited, I'm not going to say thank you to each person, just move on to the next person. So Jennifer, Charlotte, Paula, Andrea, Melissa.
Perhaps re-emphasizing some of the points made earlier. Do not wait until a pandemic or crisis to build relationships, both with your board and with your staff. Start building effective relationships sooner rather than later and working out the kinks as soon as you possibly can.
I think I would emphasize being decisive. It's okay to make mistakes. You can always make corrections, but you have to do something. You can't sit back and wait for things to happen to you. You have to be proactive.
And along those same lines, even with all the unknowns that we have today, I think communicating that you're addressing and aware of the unknowns so that people are aware that you're taking steps and you will be prepared.
The community of stakeholders in the not-for-profit sector is very gracious. And if you're not sure what to do, reach out and ask someone and they will help you find the right resources. Everyone wants to see everyone else be successful.
I would just say if you're meeting on a monthly or quarterly basis, because of the pandemic, don't stop once it's over, because it will be over one day. Keep meeting. So that way, like Jennifer mentioned, you can be ready for the next storm. So let's just keep that cadence going and keep meeting and keep the conversation going.
Thank you so much to our panelists. I think we finished with just 2 minutes over. So we're very close to the next panel starting at 2:05. I'd like to remind the participants that are attending this webinar that it is being recorded. So go back to the pages, the Facebook Live pages, and you'll be able to review this panel and the other 2 panels that are about to follow our first panel. Again, thank you so much to all our panelists. And I hope that we've delivered some usable information to the nonprofits that are part of this virtual nonprofit checkup. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Enjoy your day.
Thank you so much, Rich, and the whole panel for that great conversation. Next, we have Amy West, the Executive Vice President and Chief Financial Officer at AHRC NYC, who will be moderating our second panel on nonprofit financial health assessment. Amy?
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Our session is going to focus on financial health, and we know how critical financial health is to a not-for-profit organization's ability to carry out its mission. To discuss the importance of financial health, we have this amazing panel with us today. So panelists, to start, if you would kindly introduce yourselves and in 3 words or less, if you can please identify the biggest challenge facing not-for-profits today. So I'm going to start with Roderick. And Roderick, I don't know if you go by Rod or Roderick.
Hi, Amy. Rod is just fine.
Great.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rod Jones. I'm the Executive Director of Goddard Riverside and Stanley Isaac Centers, located in Upper Manhattan. And I think in 3 words, the biggest challenges will be long-term sustainability.
Okay, Bill?
Good afternoon, I'm Bill Gutman from Northern Rivers Family of Services in the Capital Region. I'm going to take an extra word, but I'm going to piggyback on prior comments. It's fiscal viability in a changing world. it's not going back to the old ways.
Great. Paul?
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Paul Wolf from Denham Wolf Real Estate Services. We are a full-service real estate firm that only represents nonprofits. And my 3 words would be preserving flexibility sustainably.
Wow. All right. Hilda?
Hello, Amy, and hello, everyone who are joining us today. My name is Hilda Polanco, and I am the founder of a firm called Fiscal Management Associates, known as FMA. As of January of this year, FMA has joined forces with BDO, and we are now BDO FMA. We work exclusively with nonprofits and the funders that support them in building their financial capacity, and in that goal, helping them reach their mission, goals, and impact.
Great.
And the greatest challenge is managing change.
Great. John?
Afternoon, everyone. I'm Johnny Sanio. I'm a partner in Citron Cooperman's not-for-profit New York City office, and I also lead our national practice where we work with various clients, whether they're startups or well-established nonprofits, in a vast array of areas, whether it be from audit and compliance to tax matters, as well as to advisory needs and services. I've been working with nonprofits well over 20 years, and I enjoy working with everyone here. I've spoken with many of you previously as well, and look forward to another great session. Going somewhat last, I think a lot of have used the words of sustainability and economic viability as the keys. Obviously, as an auditor, I would say that is most important, but also having talent retention and being able to carry the mission are other things that I think are important, and we'll cover that a little bit in the session as well.
Thank you. And Jody?
Hello, I'm Jody Warren. I'm a partner at Capel, Barnett, Madelon, and Schoenfeld. My practice is in real estate, but I primarily work with nonprofits on purchase and sale agreements, leases, license agreements, and different kinds of development projects. I would say budget constraints while also continuing mission is a big issue that I'm seeing right now.
Great. And I'm going to cheat a little bit and cite 2 challenges, but in 3 words, I promise. And that would be staffing and liquidity. Okay, so I formulated a few questions for our panelists. So I'm going to start with Hilda. And Hilda, how does an organization remain financially resilient with so much at stake?
Thank you, Amy. And I would start by saying that for an organization to be financially resilient, it really needs to be thinking in a couple of ways. It needs to be focused on the long term, partnering with community to be relevant in the short term, and being able to tell their financial story to outside stakeholders. We know that many organizations' business models changed through the pandemic. And so telling your financial story is based on understanding it and being able to tell funders what are your needs in your reimagined future. And in order to do that, you need to know what that future is, which means we need to be thinking about the long term. I also think it's about partnering with the staff. And so a focus on talent, we heard some of this in the first panel, is critical. More than ever, staff and individuals are looking for a sense of purpose, and they're looking for a sense of belonging. So as leaders, we want to make sure that we're offering flexibility around compensation and personal growth, and that we're planning for really a culture of belonging and equity, pay and otherwise. Lastly, I would say we need to remain relevant. And so being honest with ourselves as leaders as to what is still relevant in the community. Are we still providing the right services, and what does the community need today?
Great. Does anyone have something to add to Hilda's comments? No? Okay. My second question is for Rod. And Rod, why is the financial health of not-for-profits important to New York City's recovery, or New York's recovery? And with changing city leadership, and a new governor, how can elected officials and decision makers better support the financial health of nonprofits?
So, Amy, I think it's important first to consider the role of the not-for-profit sector in New York's health on a good year when it's not a pandemic. You know, in reality, we serve a critical role of being the safety net. And when you think about New York as a whole, in terms of ensuring that the masses of people are educated and trained and employed so that we can meet basic work demand, that we can recruit and retain industry, in terms of the social fabric and wellness, in terms of safety and livability of a city. Those are all the things that the not-for-profit sector actually contributes to the wellness of New York as a whole. And when you think about times of crisis, we play even a greater role because we really become the bridge between the intent of government and the actual execution. And so, you know, when government, as it goes further for recovery, begins to think of ways to bring everybody along, it really is the not-for-profit sector that understands the nuances of community and how communities operate, as well as how things might be most effectively implemented on the ground. And so it really is our sector that will play that role of both amplifying the voice of community to government, and on the flip side, implementing on the ground, because government itself will serve as a blunt object, but it really is the not-for-profit sector that does the fine-tuned work necessary for us to meet the needs of people in the recovery. I think the second part of the question of the new leadership coming in, I think is critically important. And I heard Jennifer Jones-Austin talk a little bit about relationships. I think what I would say that new leaders coming in need to really find structured ways to invite not-for-profits to the table so that as we plan for future crises as well as recovery, that we're doing it in a way that's in partnership, that there's a clear understanding of how things really work on the ground, and that we're able to anticipate challenges as they come. When we talk about disaster planning and those kinds of things, it really is the not-for-profit sector who has been filling the middle ground of giving kids computers to make education work, and making sure that people who have mental health challenges have the technology necessary to operate in revised approaches to service delivery. And so I think the key is making sure that not-for-profits have seats at the table, and that there's a two-way planning process that's inclusive.
Great. Do you feel that not-for-profits currently have a seat at the table?
I think as I think about what not-for-profits had to do through this pandemic, I start to wonder whether we were well placed in terms of planning. So when I think about the amount of work that organizations like mine had to do in terms of, you know, we talk about educating children remotely, almost in an impromptu way. It was organizations like ours that had to raise money to make sure that every kid in the household had a computer to use to learn, because oftentimes there were competing times, or hearing apparatus for kids who live in 3-bedroom apartments and there are 5 or 6 children, or seniors who didn't have meals. We continue to deliver meals on the ground, which suggests to me that the level of coordination and planning and pre-planning for disaster recovery wasn't quite as tight as it could have been if there was early planning and people were at the table on a not-for-profit sector side.
Amy, can I piggyback on something Rod said that I think we need to educate both the new mayor and the new governor? 1 in 6 jobs in New York State are not-for-profit. And we are the economic engine that when the elected officials go to recruit new companies and new firms and build new buildings, that's what their employees want. They want a strong not-for-profit sector, be it the education sector, developmental disabilities, private schools, and the like. So I think the timing's perfect to help the elected officials know that the not-for-profit sector is here and needs to be strong if you want New York to be strong and New York City.
Great.
And the soapbox.
I would just add to
That's
that.
just fine. Yeah, Paul?
Sorry, I would just add to that also the nonprofit sector draws a lot of tourism and produces a lot of multiplier effect. The dollars that are spent when somebody comes in to see an off-Broadway show or to go to a museum are significant. And certainly the electeds have to acknowledge the tremendous impact that the nonprofit community has on the city.
Absolutely. Anyone else? Okay. We've talked about staffing, and clearly we've seen a major shift in our workforce model. And I think the other thing of significance is kind of an organization's real property footprint. So Paul, given that real estate is typically such a significant portion of a nonprofit's budget, often behind staffing, are you seeing organizations evaluate their real estate differently? And do you think any of the changes are permanent?
Short answer is absolutely. Real estate affects everything in the strategic plan. And historically, people expected real estate was going to be their second highest expense item behind staffing. And for venue dependent entities such as theaters or health centers or education schools, it's a substantially higher percentage of their budget. So it's a major concern. And it used to always be, well, we have to dedicate a lot of our resources to real estate. That is now being questioned. Do we really have to spend so much money? Could we pull back on some of our real estate and maybe deploy resources for improved technology or other ways to serve our staff and our constituency? Location, which everybody always felt was so important. Suddenly we have organizations who are saying, I want to grow and I love New York, but I can grow across the country much more affordably. I can rent space in Kansas and I can hire people at a lower salary. And now all of a sudden I don't have to grow in New York. The real estate used to always be an important part of your brand, right? So people would come to your space and you were trying to send a message to your funders, to your constituency, to your staff. Is that the same? What message are you providing now to your constituency by the decisions you make with regard to your real estate? And we think workplace culture is going to be significantly impacted as well. How do we interact with each other? And this, of course, ties into management and operations, because the idea of real estate, everybody coming together all the time is just, and I think this is going to change. This is not going to come back to the way it was. I don't believe we're going back to a place where everybody's in the office 5 days a week. Venue dependent entities, I'll use theaters, for example, now have to think about how to make changes to their physical plant to make people more comfortable. I mean, for us, it's very exciting because all of a sudden people get enthusiastic about funding infrastructure. So we're putting a lot of touchless toilets into theaters. That's great. Normally people only wanted to fund nice lobbies and so forth. But where the funding comes from for these venue dependent entities is going to be, I think, a very important question to ask. But things are absolutely changed with how people are evaluating their relationship to real estate. We are supporting those conversations. One anecdote I like to give is a healthcare group we work with who anticipated at the beginning of the pandemic they'd be shrinking, is now saying actually they need more space for telehealth because a lot of their constituency can't afford computers and doesn't have access to good Wi-Fi. So they're creating space within the health center to provide access to telehealth. Totally unexpected, but we're seeing more of that now. I think that's a great story. I'll let other people comment too. Sorry.
Jody?
Yeah, so just to add to that, I think now is a really important time for nonprofits to kind of take a step back and think about what their space needs really are and how they can accomplish their goals and their missions, you know, whether they have a space or they're just virtual or some combination of the two. But now is the time to kind of think through that. And I think what we were saying before, it's really a time to try to manipulate and come to terms with what your goals are and how you can further those through a space or virtual or really a combination of the two.
And I guess, is that accomplished through a real property rationalization plan? I've heard that term being used by many organizations. So how does one go about that?
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Jody. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think you can go about it in multiple ways. Trying to think about your space more as multi-purpose, multifunctional, shared space. So there's different ways to achieve this, but it's kind of looking, if you're owning real estate versus leasing, it's looking at your space more practically and, really digging deep into what your needs are and how you can reduce that line item in your budget or create more revenue as well by leasing or, other forms.
But Paul hit on a trap that we need to be careful of. I think some board of directors and CFOs eyes light up when they say, oh, we can reduce our lease costs by 50%. I think some of those dollars have to be reinvested in Wi-Fi, common sites, better IT infrastructure, better Wi-Fi. So before your CFO takes all the savings from your lease, make sure you've made the right investments.
I just want to add also what's a positive outcome of landlords facing a lot of tenants leaving and not paying rent is a greater willingness to sign short-term leases, which was not previously was not something that landlords wanted to do, which gives you the potential to explore flexibility. As I said in the beginning, we want to preserve flexibility, but do it sustainably. There are risks with short-term leases as well. If the market goes up, you could be exposed. But just if you're not sure yet what to do, you can probably buy some time more easily than in the past to figure it out.
Rod, did you want to add something?
Yeah, just to say, I think many of us on the not-for-profit side have already made inroads into what that space reduction looks like. In that 2 years ago, we had to, well, almost 2 years ago now, we had to make adjustments in our service delivery system to accommodate employees. And so we've already had many people working remotely, and we've had an opportunity to examine what that looks like. And so I think for many of us, it's really a matter of just pausing to make an analysis of who really needs to come back versus who can stay remote. We've already purchased technology. We've already changed process for signature guarantees and verifications. And so the last 2 years have been pretty telling in that regard.
Great. Anything else? Jody, I guess just picking up on something that Paul had said, that there's actually not-for-profits that are looking for more space. So what are you seeing? Are you in general, are not-for-profits kind of contracting their real property footprint, or are they seeking more space, or does it really depend?
I think it's a mix. I think, like I said before, now is the time where I think a lot of nonprofits are taking that step back and considering what their needs are, and also taking the opportunity that if they own buildings in New York to try to generate more income. So for example, if they're using their space maybe from 9 to 3, now is a time where they might be thinking about how can we have somebody come in, another nonprofit, or someone else come into the space and use the same location that we once thought was, for one purpose, now is for multi-purpose, for more than one user. How can they come in and generate income? So maybe you're using it from 9 to 3 and you're leasing it to another nonprofit that's doing some kind of after-school programs, or holding AA meetings or things like that. So I think it's more rethinking your space and just thinking creatively about how you can use it, how you can reduce those expenses, but also generate some income. So it's really thinking multi-purpose shared space. And then, for me, I'm working with 2 nonprofits organizations now, where their mission, even though we've gone to this virtual world, their mission still involves a physical space. They provide temporary housing for different populations. So, they might not need 60 rooms that they had before, but they still need a space. So one of my clients is leasing out their building because the operating expenses are just astronomical and they don't need that large of a building. And they're actually renting from another nonprofit the rooms that they need and taking the money that they get to, invest in technology and invest in other activities and programs that they can provide for the community. Whereas I have another client that's selling the property and, buying a new smaller property that fits their needs more and creating an endowment. So there's different ways. I don't think the answer is that we need to necessarily reduce our space. I think it's just more thinking about it creatively. How can we generate revenue and decrease that gap in our budget that's taking that operating a building or leasing a building costs.
Great. Anything to add? Okay. John, what are some of the good practices you've seen from the pandemic that may or should continue in the post-pandemic world?
I think, a lot of the discussions we've had already, and especially some of the discussions that occurred in the first panel were pretty much on point with this. We've seen a lot of board engagement. We've seen a lot of interaction between management and board members, and that awakening for certain entities that maybe weren't as engaged is something that I think needs to continue into the future. I think looking at from a board level, the various tools that they have in being able to make decisions. Do you have the technology tools, dashboards, and other items to appropriately identify issues, to appropriately respond to them in a timely fashion, has been something that the pandemic kind of brought to light. And those that were able to move quickly with those tools and assets were able to come out of the pandemic a little stronger and quicker than some that maybe hadn't invested as well into those technology tools and databases. I think strategic planning was important, and I know we'll talk about that in a little bit more, but obviously being able to really look at your mission and who you are and where you want to be. I know Rod mentioned it previously about having your mission out there and being able to reaffirm all the good that you do as a not-for-profit for your community and society as a whole has to really be brought to light, whether it's for additional funding, whether it's for new donors, whether it's for new government contracts. But how do you tell that story? Is it through an impact statement, as Charlotte mentioned on the first panel? Is it through your 990s? Is it through your financial statements? How do you get that messaging out so that you can reinvigorate your donor base to provide for that long-term sustainability that everyone keeps talking about? And I think a lot of management groups and boards are taking a look at that and really trying to redefine their programs and their missions so that they can adequately purport what they're doing for the society going forward. I think technology, as we all talked about, is an important thing. There's been a lot of investment, especially with the remoteness. This happened way before the pandemic. We saw a lot of social platforms. We saw a lot of online giving and fundraising that occurred. This is, with the pandemic, we saw switches to virtual galas, virtual conferences, virtual means of attracting and repurposing certain in-person events. There will be a time and place for in-person, hopefully soon. But there also is going to be an added venue here for virtual. How do you incorporate that into your business model as you move forward so that you have additional revenue streams for those that may want to, and a broader base for that matter, of those that can participate and fundraise with you. And then we talked about talent, right? Talent acquisition and retention is important. We've all seen the numbers. We've seen the loss of workforce and talent, as they called the Great Resignation from August. How do you use your technology now to attract the appropriate resources, the appropriate personnel, volunteers? Are there ways to incorporate volunteers through a remote atmosphere as well? Do you have the data capabilities to make these decisions and attract the right talent for your organization? I think those are some of the best practices and concepts that a lot of nonprofits are focusing in on now that they've seen from the pandemic, have tried to implement, and now are trying to refine so that they can lead into the future with it.
What do you want to add?
Yeah, one thing that John said, which I think is great, that we think Zoom is here to stay. But so note that a lot of nonprofits feel the same way, and virtually everybody who has an audience, be it a theater or a faith-based organization, a church, now wants to have better streaming capabilities. So all of a sudden, the streaming services, the technology is very expensive. So everybody is absolutely pursuing these things. Just to note that sometimes it takes a bit longer to get the technology you need, and it will cost more than it would have a year ago. But yeah, people are definitely adjusting their lives to incorporate that in a big way.
Right, and I guess, John, do you feel that with respect to events, that there will always be a virtual component now going forward?
More and more are starting to do that. I think that assuming you have the right contracts in place and the right streaming, as Paul mentioned, and the affordability element, it really is another opportunity to diversify the revenue stream and a way to incorporate the same programming and messaging that you can have in person concurrent. So a lot of the, like the AICPA, the New York State Societies, they all have conferences that are both either virtual or hybrid, that can be both virtual and in person. So the ability to figure out how to weave that together is another venue for revenue stream and sources, I think.
Yeah. I think both organizations would acknowledge that the one thing that they haven't quite gotten right yet is the ability to virtually network. And I think that's something that people really miss about the in-person events. Anyone else? Okay.
Just to add to that, I think what John was saying about now is the time that we're kind of refining everything, whereas, during the pandemic, I think everyone was kind of scrambling and trying to figure out how to manage this virtual world. And now nonprofits can really focus on refining that. And I think the goal really should be to try to incorporate a virtual aspect to events and meetings. I think people are expecting that going forward. And it really does just allow us to, allow nonprofits to reach so many more people that otherwise, were not in the vicinity, couldn't make the meeting. Even recording meetings, or it just allows a lot more people to participate, where previously they wouldn't, just because of their location or timing of events.
Great.
And I think to piggyback on Jody's point, I think technology has helped us actually do better in terms of net. If you really think about it, the events take a huge amount of staff time, and then you're spending a lot of money on just meals and those kinds of core parts of expenses that can be eliminated with technology.
Rod, my next question is for you. As a leader of a nonprofit organization, what lessons have you learned during the devastating impacts of the pandemic?
Yeah, Amy, I think there were a lot of them, but I'll probably point to a few. One, I think, is I think in moments of crisis during the pandemic, you realize how essential the not-for-profit sector is to wellness. We amongst others had staff who during the pandemic weren't able to call off. They could not work. They were in that essential employee pool. And so when you have essential workers, you quickly realize that in the same way that firemen and policemen are required to come to work, that our street outreach people are there working, that the folks that deliver meals to people who are homebound, they don't have the option to not work. And I think it just solidified in my mind that the sector and its safety net is really dependent on the work of not-for-profits, because we are there and have to be there when nobody else is showing up. And I think to that end, through the whole pandemic, essential workers like ours continue to show up, even when they couldn't figure out how their own families would eat, or if their families would be recovering, or if they would be sick. And so I think I've learned, and it's just resonated with me so deeply, how much our folks do in terms of keeping the safety net going. And to that end, I also start to realize how different we have to present the work that we do to the general public. Unlike charity, there are a lot of things that I think churches can do, like handing out bread and meals and packages. But there's a significant role that our organization and others like us play in times of crisis that become critically important and should be differentiated. I think the other thing we've learned is that there's absolutely a need to make sure that we crisis plan. While we can't always tell how that crisis looks, if it's the market crash of 2008, or if it's a pandemic, there's an added cost to managing crisis. And so I think we've learned through some of our own financial analysis that the cost minus model of funding the work of not-for-profits, meaning that we always get 75 to 80% of total costs, you're already working to cover that as a standard practice. And so in moments of crisis, there's always an exponential cost to that. So we were one of those organizations that were paying incentive pay in April, long before there was any government agreement around providing incentive pay. But those kinds of things become necessary in order to incentivize employees to take added risk and to extend our appreciation to them. And so there's a whole cost modeling that becomes necessary and that should be done preemptively before crisis strike, because it's not good enough in times of crisis to have to cover margin on the deficit funded programs in addition to the incentivized cost. And so I think those are two big things. And I think the last thing I've learned is around the notion of flexibility. In reality, oftentimes, not-for-profits, we set out and chart our course and the things that we're going to do and the things we hope to achieve. And in moments of crisis like this, we're often responding to our role as partners with government. So as government attempts to make sure children are educated or that seniors are safe in their home, that's not done without our sector, right? The reality is our sector is nuancing the desire and aspiration so that the execution can occur well on the ground. And I think that those become non-negotiable functions of our sector. And so I think those are the three big things I learned.
Anyone want to add to lessons learned?
I'd like to tease that out a little bit. I think Rod nailed it by saying, we asked our staff to leave their families and their kids and their relatives to come to work every day to protect our kids and our adults and those who live with us or go to school with us. So protecting and caring for our employees, as Rod suggested, either with great healthcare support, emotional support, hazard pay, ample supplies of PPEs, that's the minimum, because we ask them to sacrifice for us. And I think communicating that, taking that value and communicating it to our donors and to our state partners or city partners and saying, this is what we did to keep the safety net going, because otherwise, without our people, you wouldn't have a safety net. So I think it goes back to workforce, and there's a lot of tangents off that, but workforce was critical through this. And again, that's a message we have to take to the new city and state leaders, that they need to invest in our workforce or there will not be a safety net the next time.
I guess, as a follow-up question, you have people that have forward-facing jobs, and we do too at AHRC, where we run residential programs. And of course, that requires 24 hours a day, 7 days a week services that we provide. But, now that we're kind of starting to come out of the pandemic, and we believe, I think most people believe, that this hybrid model is here to stay. How do you build equity into your workforce structure so that someone that absolutely needs to come to work every day, and Bill, you had mentioned, overtime and premium pay, but how do you really build an equitable system where someone who, I have a staff accountant that for the most part can do their jobs remotely, and then I have someone that absolutely needs to be in and has to come in to take care of the people we support.
I'm going to get on my soapbox a little bit, because I think those folks who come in every day, be they direct care or direct service provisions or advocates or case managers, we need to pay them a living wage to begin with. Because with all due respect, some of my back office staff can work remotely, but they get paid better. So I think for our frontline heroes, we need to push for a living wage and for some special payments to recognize the work they do.
I absolutely agree with Bill. I think what this sheds light on is that we have to rethink the whole compensation structure in our field, because those outward facing people are ultimately the most exposed to hazard. And so I think it's not acceptable for us to not consider how we recalibrate wages when we talk about employees in this new format. I think for those of us who have compensation systems, we already know that for those who wind up working in other states, that we can recalibrate their wage and incentive on the market. But that still doesn't answer for the fact that the frontline folks that we have are often significantly underpaid. And when you compare their wage to the folks who work in government who have the same jobs, there's an issue there. It's not parity. And so I think we have to fix that.
Anyone else want to add to the conversation?
And the other part, Amy, and this gets into what it does to the financial viability. If we don't have a solid workforce, that negatively impacts our revenue, which then makes our financial underpinnings get very shaky. So it goes full circle. And that's kind of hard to explain to your government funders or your commercial partners, because they don't want to pay more, but in the long run, it's going to make your agency more viable.
Great point. Okay, John had mentioned strategic planning, and Hilda, this question's for you. Is strategic planning still possible with so much uncertainty?
Well, I think oftentimes the word strategic planning feels overwhelming to folks when so much is difficult to predict. I would say that planning, we can drop the word strategic if that is more likely to help. Planning is here to stay. The change, I think the theme of this panel has been change and the inevitable continuation of that change. So I would ask the leaders on the call to really think about how are they going to build their planning muscle. So we don't think of planning as a destination. We think of it as a journey. Mm-hmm. And the pandemic really created sort of crisis planning, but we'd like to see go beyond the crisis. So for me, 18 months to 2 years is a good window to think about what are the decisions we're making today that are going to have that impact into the future. And that idea that we need to be ready for change. And Rod, I loved when you talked about recalibrating wages. There's two terms that I think in planning are key, which is recalibration and course correction. And our planning muscle needs to be built knowing that will happen. For some organizations, they actually have stronger balance sheets today than they did pre-pandemic. There was one-time funding with PPP, there was emergency funding, and the partnership between the board and staff to determine what's the best way to invest those one-time inflows of funds. We've seen decisions around greater programming versus infrastructure. And so preparing for that crisis, another theme that I'm hearing on this panel that there will be more in the future, comes around choices and scenarios. The day when we could have planned a year and say, this is the plan, I think is in the past. It's more about what's plan A and what's plan B. And engaging the board. I feel that sometimes executive directors feel like they have to have it all figured out before they bring it to the board. And I see the involvement of the board in that long-term thinking with which scenario are we going to go forward with? And what will the levers be for us to know that actually we're in scenario B, scenario A is not happening? Those I think are really critical. And just the idea that scenario planning, I think, replaces strategic planning, and having a mechanism for it to be organization-wide feels like a really good next step.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with Hilda more. I think that it's less about these super long view planning, but I think scenario planning is everything in times of high change. And I think for not-for-profits, we often are forced to have to look out on the horizon because we're affected by private industry, the condition and welfare of private industry and government. We're impacted by the long-term effect of whatever goes on with them. And so scenario planning becomes necessary. What happens if there's a policy change? What happens if this particular industry that supports us is not doing well and they're merging and consolidating? What then is plan B? And I think that scenario planning becomes necessary. Some of us should be thinking about out year spending versus every year, because if the fee and revenue base doesn't rise to meet the decline in federal support, then we all have problems. And so I think that scenario planning is necessary.
I'm extremely excited about this whole conversation, and Hilda, thank you so much for introducing it. But we have for a long time been doing what we call scenario development, which is trying to help organizations think through potential futures for their real estate. But in a time of so much change and so much uncertainty, how do you make a major commitment, like a real estate commitment, a 10-year lease, purchasing a property and doing a capital campaign? So it has been a phenomenal process. And I was thrilled when earlier this year, people started doing it again. The planning started really in earnest again. We saw early this year, people were trying to figure, so what if? And those what ifs are taking some different paths than they used to. And now we see people feeling emboldened to actually start to make decisions, in part knowing that they've seen what the potential futures could be if things go a different direction. So I 100% agree with everything Hilda and Rod said. That's great.
And I guess, we've certainly heard a lot about scenario planning. Is it here to stay? Because we talked about scenario planning after 9/11, and we talked about scenario planning after Hurricane Sandy and when the markets tanked in 2008. So has the pandemic really introduced scenario planning for good?
Say yes, and now we're all worried about the economy and inflation in 2 years. So we're already into the next scenario planning.
Absolutely. And if there was a way to engage leadership at all levels in scenario planning, I think we'd also be much more successful, from the frontline staff all the way through board. The closer we are to delivering the services, I think the more innovative we can be with what it would mean to respond to a different scenario. So I also encourage the team building. We think of it as a team sport and not something that senior leadership does in a vacuum, for sure.
Okay. And as a follow-up, John, can you give us your thoughts on cash flow modeling? I had talked about my concern about liquidity, budgeting, and overall liquidity monitoring.
I think that those three topics really go hand in hand with planning, like Hilda said, right? You're thinking about scenarios, you're thinking about long-term, and the days of planning 3 to 5 years out really don't make much sense when you're trying to escape a crisis or just survive into the future. But as you reemerge, we've learned about the importance of cash flow modeling. We've learned about looking at where you stand, whether it be in the short 6-month period, 9-month period, 12 months, or 18 months out. And knowing where you are and what you have is very important to knowing where you can invest and where you can go into the future. So, the ability to reassess cash flow, to make it timely, it's not a one-time aspect or a one-time process. Hilda talked about making it a journey. It really is a journey. A journey doesn't just happen, get planned, and finish at a certain spot. You have to constantly revisit your budget. You have to constantly revisit your cash flow modeling in order to make the tweaks that are necessary for the conditions that you're encountering. And let's face it, the pandemic brought a whole bunch of issues that many had not anticipated and had to tweak their cash flow investments, or how were they going to survive, what cuts needed to be made. So I think that the lessons that we learned from that is that cash flow modeling and the ability to set realistic budgets that are actually appropriate and have the buy-in not only of the board, but of management from all sectors, from the various departments, is critical to establishing good data that you can use into the future. And I think those are some of the key points that come out of the pandemic.
And Amy, if I may just add to John's point, I think sort of the idea of tools, I'm hoping that those on the call can really think about, do I have tools that help me be ready to recalibrate, or do I have tools that I'm afraid if I push them too much, they'll break? And it's building that cash flow model that has the different dimensions. It's building the scenario planning that connects everything. So building the planning muscle it's about the people, but it's also about the tools. And I encourage all of you to think about ways to strengthen the tools that you're bringing to the process.
Great.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, Amy, I think it's the tools, but it's also about how we think about money and its use. In not-for-profit, we often have this habit of magic math. You know, money will pop up someplace. And I think these crises really are moments that should really give us pause about that kind of math. You know, oh yeah, this may come or that may come. We more than most businesses should really be thinking about scenarios all the time, because at any given point, we're so subject to government or contributions that at any given moment, we should be carefully monitoring, you know, the scenarios we build, and then things like cash, because, you know, oftentimes in not-for-profit, you can go a long time with rolling deficits before you realize that you can't make payroll. And so unlike other industries, the accounting under it becomes problematic if you're not careful.
Great. And I guess one of the things that I'm struggling with a little bit is we're talking about having a plan that's relatively short term and not the 3 to 5 years out that we used to do. And yet, you know, Paul would say, okay, well, it's going to take us 3 months to find new space for you to operate. And so, and then finding a landlord that will entertain a short-term lease. I think the same with staffing patterns. You know, we're certainly seeing, I've just been amazed at some of the resumes that I've been seeing where, you know, I'm going to invest in a staff person who seems incredibly talented, but doesn't seem to stay with an organization for more than 9 months to a year. And we know how costly it is to onboard someone, to train someone, you know, and that process alone takes 3 months. So I'm struggling a little bit with this notion of really short-term, relatively short-term planning, but then at some point needing to make a long-term investment in an organization's sustainability. I don't know, Paul, any thoughts on that?
I have a lot of thoughts on that, and it's something that we struggle with not only for our clients, but for as a small business owner myself. We're facing the same thing. I think to the extent you can preserve flexibility is great, and optionality, but at some point you have to make decisions, which is why, as everybody's been saying now, plan the hell out of it first before you make your decision. And where you can take incremental steps. We say it's like a first pass around the mountain. Before you make the big decision, make sure you're looking at the whole landscape. Spend only as much as you need to have enough information to take the next step towards making a decision. But I think decisions have to be made. The short-term leases are going to go away. There are people who own a building and there's a roof issue or an air conditioning issue. Do I spend the money or do I sell the building? You have to make a decision now. So you have to have a process in place, and there has to be governance in place to manage that process.
And if I could add to that, I think our ability to take risks is strengthened by our ability to have a reserve that allows us some breathing room. And so I used to sometimes have a hard time convincing leaders about the need for reserves, or we call it the LUNA concept, liquid unrestricted reserves. I don't think I have that same difficulty today, given what the last 2 years have been. So one of the ways that I think people, leaders can feel more confident in making decisions is knowing that they have something to fall back on if it wasn't exactly what they thought. It's much harder to take risk when you feel like you're sort of 6 months at a time.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the advantages of having really strong processes in place too, right? Somehow you just weather through an era of disruption better if you have those kind of policies and processes in place. I guess just getting a little bit back to real property, Paul. What are we seeing? Commercial real estate is struggling right now. Do you think those changes are long-term, or what is the state of commercial leasing?
So I get asked that a lot by our clients, saying is now the time to sign a lease because rents are down. The reality is that it really differs by asset class. Today, the older buildings, which tend to be where most of the nonprofits are located, those prices are definitely depressed. They're lower than they were. Newer buildings, particularly buildings that paid attention to what is called like a well building standard, that pay attention to health, these buildings are actually recovering much faster. And things are improving for them, but there are good deals to be seen in the office market. I believe that's going to stay like that certainly for the next, I'd say 6 to 12 months. We're seeing recovery, but there's still, I think, better terms than would have been realized before the pandemic. The commercial condo market is still lower than it was pre-pandemic. Where we're seeing a lot of competition, which is terrible, really, is in the warehouse asset class, where warehouses used to be fabulous spaces for arts organizations to go and be able to perform, or food pantries to go and get cheap space. Now all the last mile users, the Amazons of the world, are bidding up those sites. And they're just, it used to be you couldn't afford them. Now they're just not available because the Amazons take them before you get a chance to work with them. My last comment will be on development sites that we saw a year ago, 9 months ago. Development sites, an opportunity to build from scratch, was a very hot commodity because people felt they could buy today, go through their entitlement process, and start to build 2 years out. In the past couple of months, that has been changing significantly, in part because of some legislation that's floating around the city and state right now. And now we're seeing much more focus on things like multifamily buildings that are built where people have greater confidence in that. So it depends on the sector or within real estate, but I do believe that there will be this opportunity for a period of time longer where the typical office space that's rented by a nonprofit will be more affordable than it was certainly 18 months ago.
Great. And I guess, Jody, what do not-for-profits need to think about when they're looking to sell, buy, lease space, in particular, statutory approvals, et cetera?
Yeah, so I think this really goes back to, what Hilda was saying before and what Paul was saying. It's really important to plan. I think during the pandemic, a lot of people didn't want to make big decisions about their real estate because of the state of the market, but it's really important to take the time to do your due diligence, especially if you're going to be selling property or even leasing property. But you need to understand first the value of your site. How much is your site worth, so that if you are going to sell, you're kind of in the driver's seat there. You understand, what the appraised value is. You want to order a title report. You want to understand, if there's any, a lot of nonprofits, especially religious organizations, have owned property for hundreds of years, and you pull their title reports and there's old mortgages and deed restrictions, violations that need to be cleared. All of this takes time. And so by doing this up front, you are lessening many, many headaches later on, and can actually help in your negotiations of your contracts as well, because you can tackle these issues. You want to form a team, you want to have an attorney and a broker. You also, which was mentioned before, you want to have internal teams. You want to make sure that your board is heavily involved, because when you go to a vote, you want to make sure that everyone's aligned with the decisions that you're making. You want to understand the cost and expense. It's not cheap even to sell property. You need to understand what those fees are, what your transfer tax is. All of these things go into the planning. And then most importantly, what is your next plan? Where are you going to go? How are you going to continue your mission? What are you going to use those funds for? And then the second part of the question, for nonprofits in New York, you need, in order to sell or to lease substantially all of your property, you need to get Attorney General approval of this. So you can't just go sell your property, you have to get approval to do that. And if you're leasing your property as well. So you need to understand and start preparing for this, because it's, it could take 3 to 4 months to get approval. You need all of your organizational documents. So it's just not a quick decision, let's sell or lease our property. Let's take the time to think about all the due diligence that goes into these big decisions. And they are big decisions.
Okay, we have one question from our audience, but before, Hilda, how do we think about life after PPP?
Well, PPP was a lifeline for many organizations. We've actually see that through the magic of help from the community and complying with PPP forgiveness, we, as I said, have stronger balance sheets. But that was one time. And I think life after PPP is about steady, consistent funding sources, partnerships with funders. We saw many funders willing to relieve some of the restrictions, the reporting expectations. And I do think there's an openness to speak to, especially philanthropy, around investing in this organization's ability to be around after the next crisis. We can shift the conversation from sort of purchasing services to investing in future sustainability. And PPP was for the short term. I think it's that perspective of how can we sell the future sustainability as something that a funder would want to invest in. And I just want to tie that back to life after PPP is significantly shaped by our ability to plan. So we need to be able to tell a funder, we want you to invest in our future, and here's what we envision it to be, even if we think that might change in the future.
Great. Anyone
Amy,
want to
can I
add?
put one caveat on that? I think the
Sure.
other warning would be is New York State is looking very carefully at PPP, and they may want to call the money back. And I know all the accounting firms and the CPAs are very concerned about that. But in the human service space, there may be some negative decisions, because if they call back PPP, that impacts rates of the future and things like that, and CFR and all those complicated things. So I would just advise people to be careful on what the state is doing, and we all need to band together and lobby them so they don't do something that's negative in the short and long term.
Just to add to that, again, the compliance around not just PPP, but any government contract and funding that you have is rigorous, right? The reporting element is important, and understanding the complexities and nuances that go into it is even more difficult, right? Especially when things are being pushed out and funded without all the necessary guidance being available. Think about the various funding that came out for provider relief funding, or even the shuttered venue grants that have come out recently. The important thing is to really understand and source the data, source the expenses that you're claiming, so that you're not double dipping, that you're not utilizing funds from grants twice and being reimbursed, so that you're not subject to those takebacks and clawbacks or question costs into the future. I agree that it's very onerous and time consuming to put it all together, and Hilda's absolutely right. This was a one-time issue with PPP, but federal funding has increased overall for most entities, most nonprofits, and I think that level of reinvigoration is going to continue hopefully into the future as well. How do you develop processes and policies to accept those funds? Should you accept those funds? And the compliance that goes with it is something all boards are going to have to think about as well.
Yeah, and Amy, if I can just follow on to John's point, I think that we would not be doing the sector a service if we didn't recognize that many of the not-for-profits are operating so close to the margin because there's not administrative overhead support, that the organizations who could have used PPP to get over the hump, many didn't have the capacity to apply, nor to meet the rigorous reporting requirements that are often imposed on not-for-profit as an industry. And so I think it's critically important as we to steal Hilda's point around planning, as we plan together in partnership with government around what it will take to manage the next series of crises, we have to acknowledge that the safety net begins to have cracks and tatters when we can, in fact, get resources to all of the system. Because there are many not-for-profits who weren't able to get the PPP applications done. And it was only through rigorous national advocacy that certain organizations were even able to participate. But I think this is a constant around how much it takes to administer government resources, government issued resources. And so I think we can't ignore those factors as we talk about things like how we respond in cases of emergency when agencies are already at the margin on a good day.
Great. And we have 1 minute left. So I have one question from the attendees, and it's for our real property experts. Is it easy to get people to donate property?
The short answer is no. The few times that there's been free space, it's usually been a competitive process. Like we did this with Poets House years ago down in Battery Park City, where Battery Park City wanted a nonprofit. They gave free space for 65 years, but it was competitive. You had to demonstrate that you had the capacity to actually raise the funds to do the fit out and to actually run the operation. But it's very rare that that there's somebody's donating property that you actually want. Sometimes people try to donate property that you really don't want.
Great. Well, that concludes our session on financial health. Panelists, thank you so much. And attendees, thank you so much for attending.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Amy, and the rest of the panel for that great discussion. Now, I would like to just take a moment to thank our wonderful sponsors for today's event. So I just want to say thank you once again to Capel, Barnett, Metalone, and Schoenfield, BDO FMA, BHI, Citron Cooperman, Denham Wolf, CRF CPAs and Advisors, JMT Consulting, Lockton Companies LLC, Marks Paneth, and the Association of Nonprofit Specialists. Now let's get into our last and final panel of the day, which is going to be moderated by Jeremy Christopher Kohomban, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Children's Village. And this panel is going to be all about keeping up with technology.
Great. Thank you, Amanda. And to all of you here, thanks for hanging out for the last session. And I just realized that we are the smallest panel group too. So our intention is to make some introductions. We have 4 experts that bring boots on the ground experience. So they'll get a chance to talk a little bit. We've got some structured questions. And if you have questions, please put them in the chat because we are planning to give enough time for your questions. And that's our intention. It's great to be with you. Technology in nonprofits has always been a challenge, regardless of our size. We always feel behind the 8 ball. The promise of technology, when factored in with implementation and daily use, seems to be never quite there. The product you buy often promises much more than what you think you got a year later. Now, some of it is tied to implementation, some of it is tied to user expertise or comfort, but we've always struggled as an industry. More recently, we've also struggled with the issues of cybersecurity. The Children's Village, not ashamed to say this, a couple of years ago, ended up in a ransomware situation that was completely unexpected. We thought we were prepared, but clearly we were not. And what you learn is that all it takes is one person responding to something. And with 1,300 employees, there was one person that clicked on something, and whatever we had built in was inadequate. More recently, we had a situation where a well-crafted spam message was responded to, which then led to a cash deposit being made to a cash account in another state. I am sharing this because I think there's a reluctance in our industry to talk about what happens. And these things happen. So we have industry experts, and let's get right to them. We have Aldervan Daly, who is the Executive Vice President for Institutional Advancement at Rising Ground. We have Tali Legger, the Associate Director for Procurement Operations with the City of New York, the Mayor's Office of Contract Services, a group that we work with quite often. We have David Khan, the Chief Revenue Officer at JMT Consulting, and Hassan Khan, Principal Technology for the Technology Services at Mark Spanath, an auditor that we know quite well. Let's start with Tali. Tali, you have some prepared statements. What do you want us to know?
Sure. Thanks, Jeremy, and hello, everyone. I'm very excited to be here, and especially to discuss the topic of keeping up with technology. At the Mayor's Office of Contract Services, or MOCS, as I'm sure many of you know us as, we've been working on bringing New York City procurement to a fully digital platform. So hope that many of you have heard the system, use the system, but Passport, which is the city's digital procurement and sourcing solutions portal, was designed to make the procurement process easier, more transparent, and accessible to all businesses. With Passport, we have looked to leverage technology to address, many of the longstanding issues and to support a simpler and more efficient solicitation process, support a faster contract approval process, and of course, the most important, a more timely registration process. So Passport picked up where HHS Accelerator left off, and it gave us a world of opportunity to better use technology and data to consolidate a lot of the old functionality that folks were ingrained in. We at MOCS are working hard to elevate procurement and are always looking for new ideas around Passport to support our vendors and facilitate advancement. We believe we can't get an idea for service on the ground without procurement, and getting an idea from on the ground and alleviating it to the next level, and making it come to fruition really needs technology to support it. As an industry, health and human services make up over 1/3 of the city's procurements. And MOCS has spent a long time working with the city's nonprofits of all scales to develop Passport, HHS Accelerator, and create efficient and streamlined technology portals to get funds to the communities and get services off the ground.
Thank you. That's a good start. We've got some tough questions for you later, so brace yourself. Let's go to Aldervan.
Hello, my name is Aldervan Daly. I am, as was announced, the Executive Vice President for Institutional Advancement at Rising Ground. I've been here for a couple years now. We've done some major moves as an organization. We've moved our headquarters to Brooklyn from Yonkers, and I was part of bringing that on. In the fundraising area, especially, we are a small shop for the size of organization that we are. We are a $140 million, 190-year-old organization. We're a moderately small shop. So technology is vital. It is vital to making sure that we can get the work done that we need to get done, that we can process all the thank you letters and process gifts and keep track of foundations. And as well as when the pandemic happened, it truly meant that we had to be able to do work that is typically done by hand. And I'm always laughing when people say, we're going to have a paperless office, because I don't know how you have a fundraising paperless office when I got to keep copies of every thank you letter. But it did mean that checks were coming in and things were happening. And so it was an exciting time as far as the technology was concerned in keeping things going, both for the department and for the agency itself.
Thank you. I forgot to mention the bios for our panel are on the website. We didn't want to waste time on that, but take a look, because then you'll have a sense of the kind of breadth and depth that you're getting with this panel today. Hassan, talking about breadth and depth, you've been responsible for some massive projects. You're an expert in cybersecurity and in helping develop best practice policies. What are we listening as you come on this panel? What do you have to offer?
Jeremy, thank you. Thank you. Well, one, thank you for the vote of confidence and the kind remarks, but good afternoon, everybody. Before I just quickly go through, my introductory remarks, I would like to pivot for a quick second. And Jeremy, I'll go back and thank you for sharing about the breach at Children's Village, right? You're absolutely right. I feel the nonprofits that I've served, there is this sense of not being ashamed, but saying, what did we do wrong? Or what can we do better moving forward that this doesn't repeat itself, right? Going through a breach is not a fun experience. It's that day when you can't work the way you were supposed to, your data is held ransom, or your systems are not available to you, right? You have to report that out. The FBI may get involved. Then you have to get your cyber insurer involved. They will hire a forensics auditor to come in. I mean, the process is just is exhaustive and it's voluminous. Wants to go through that, but I will share with you, and this is for every single nonprofit profession that's attending today. And thank you all for all the attendees that are listening in. That this is not uncommon, and this is not uncommon or common just to the nonprofit space. I feel every single institution, for-profit, nonprofit, globally, has either been breached. Well, the attempts to breach daily, every minute, every second. Some of us succumb to it, others don't. And this is not to say that Children's Village did not have the right controls in place, or there was, lack of management oversight. All of that was in place. And I'll share this example. And I've been sharing this for the last year, but I find it interesting. There's a firm in Spain, and I'll call it a firm. It's an $8 billion institution. They have a CFO, they have a CEO, they have a COO, they have every single C-suite personnel that there is. But it's a nefarious entity. They hire nefarious individuals that all they do when they wake up in the morning is try and breach other institutions. So I say all of that yes, let's please be vigilant. Let's keep moving forward with focusing on cyber risks and all the privacy regulations that come about. But unfortunately, the world that we live in, this has become just a normal occurrence. So with that, just quickly, I'll introduce myself and I'll let my good esteemed colleague David introduce himself. I've been a technologist the last 20 years now at this juncture, but for the last 11, all I've done is serve nonprofits, government entities, higher education institutions, healthcare organizations, all lumped into the nonprofit space. I've had the good fortune of serving my clients with strategic initiatives, selecting best of breed ERPs, moving to the cloud, digital transformation, insources versus outsourcing. But I truly find the common denominator of success remains an imperative focus on information security, cybersecurity, and all these privacy regulations that keep coming about. And I'll just say a few: New York Shield, California Consumer Privacy Act, European Union's GDPR, and we'll get into it as the panel progresses. But thank you, glad to be here. David, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Hassan. David, you have a large consulting operation. I think you work with organizations of various size. What should we be listening for as you speak today?
So thanks. Well, I know if we were in person, this panel would be holding you between our panel and a cocktail is what would happen if we were in person. And so we kind of get to the point, but JMT Consulting, what we've been focusing on exclusively for nonprofits, we probably have over the past 30 years have had probably 2,000 clients. And what we really focus on is their operational improvement, operational excellence, whether it be on the front end of their systems, how they go and attract donors and how they manage grants and how they get grants. And on the back end, how do they manage their financial processes and their HR processes? And so a little bit about myself first, though, is I'm relatively new, I must admit, to the nonprofit world. And so I come from the for-profit world, But I've been a technocrat. I've ran for companies like Computer Associates, actually on Long Island in New York area. I was head of corporate product strategy and ran product development for them for many years. Also was responsible at other multi-billion-dollar software companies. And so, so I understand the issues of around different technology trends. And I think the overarching material that I see from Jeremy was, you started off that the nonprofit world has problems with implementation and realizing business benefits and so forth. And, you know, the nonprofit world is not alone. You know, I can tell you same stories about Dow and BASF and GM and Ford and, you know, a host of Procter and Gamble and, you know, huge corporations that have the same, that question the same, why did I do this? You know, kind of mentality. So, but also I think the pandemic has really created a huge digital transformation. I kind of hate that term these days. It's so overused, but digital transformation, it's really required a lot of rethinking of how nonprofits not only go to market and gain new donors and grow donors and manage their back end systems and the different technologies that enable them to support future growth. But it's not unique to the other ones. I think the pandemic has accelerated that effort. You know, not being able to be in presence, you know, the impact on how they're looking at different technologies like social media and digital marketing campaigns, how they're managing remote workers, and the cybersecurity issues related to managing those kind of things. So we're seeing I see similar kind of technology issues, you know, decision support, better analytics, those kind of things, better integration across all the different disparate systems, whether they be large corporations, large nonprofits, or even, you know, the very small nonprofits, on how they're managing their technology and how to drive business benefits out of it. So thank you for welcoming me to the panel.
Thank you, David. Tali, if we could come back to you. We worked with your team for many years on looking for solutions as we were moving past HHS Accelerator. I know not everyone here at this panel today is from New York City or serving New York City, but I think there are lessons we can learn from the passport implementation. And my specific question is, what are the struggles that you faced as you deployed the new passport?
Sure. Thanks, Jeremy. So, you know, adoption has been challenging. You know, we've moved from a paper-based world, and that alone is a whole change in culture, right? And now combine that with a global pandemic, and you can imagine the experience. You know, we're talking about adoption for the city workforce that deals with procurement every day, right? And adoption of our vendors and our providers, those that have and want to receive contracts and solicitations and work with the city of New York, right? And so we have to say, though, that the pandemic did exemplify the need for technology advancement and especially digital procurement more than ever, especially for New York City, where we lived in a paper-based world, right? So our design was centered around taking all the steps of the exhaustive New York City procurement process. And what we did with Passport is we created digital workflows that basically allow tasks to be completed in parallel, as well as provide visibility into the process, you know, transparency, visibility, streamlining processes so that the user experience is, you know, exemplified across the board, is streamlined across the board. And also so that both the contractor and the agency are adhering to all the procurement rules and regulations. So we built all of that into the system as well. And it took, you know, it took months, it took years. Passport, you know, has been phased in different releases. So release 3 is the largest one. That's what everybody has been using now, which brought the procurement process online. Many of us have used HHS Accelerator in the past, especially in the health and human service sector, but this is to a different level, so we took what we learned with HHS and now we brought that in, and those ideas, those lessons learned into something so much more large scale, And so every day we're focused on supporting our agency partners on the adoption. We work hard every day to help facilitate provider usage, and also to, share and work with our providers to understand what are the challenges, what are the roadblocks, what on your side, on the user experience, what are folks facing? And same with our agency partners as well, because the users are really the ones who are painting the picture, and they can infer to us, like, how can we take our design to the next level? How can we elevate it? How can we, take Passport, as we've, put it out there, and then keep elevating it, keep making it a strong tool in the technology sector for just working with the city. Again, as I stressed earlier, procurement is such a big part of getting an idea to fruition, especially in the nonprofit sector where services are on the ground. You want to get going, you want to get, your deliverables met, because that turns into a project happening, that turns into a community getting funding and a community getting services, especially very critical social services every day. And so that's how we have been rolling Passport out in a very, phased approach, an adoptive approach, a collaborative approach is where we are learning how is this going to work and how will this work in the future as well.
Thank you. Aldervan, question for you. It's good to have a Chief Development Officer or Advancement Officer at this panel. When it comes to raising money, we know, the value of data, and you're probably spending a lot of time trying to get the right data ready for your funders. Is the reverse true? The kind of data analysis that you do in your shop, does that trickle back to the programs to help them improve their outcomes and their reporting, and maybe help them improve in the long term? And do you have any examples of how that might work?
That's tricky, because I think that there is in most organizations, there's a certain veil between the fundraising and the programs. We support the programs, we underwrite, we provide funding for the programs. But I personally am a strong believer that it's not my job to create programs or to manage programs. That's a program person's job. But where it does come into play is when a program has a need, or there could be an enhancement to a program that the funding source that we have does not provide, then sometimes I'm able to, with my team, go out and find the resources to increase the funding to that program, or to do that special thing that needs to be done. Here, when we moved into our new facility in downtown Brooklyn, we had to recreate our family rooms for family visits. Well, I was able to find individuals who were interested in helping support that, getting those rooms up to snuff and getting what we needed in those rooms, because that were things, that cost was something that was not applicable to the contracts. So there are times like that we do. Now, what is vitally important is getting correct data from the programs to us so that we can tell your story. If I don't know exactly how many people's lives we touch a year and how many people we connect with, or how many children are adopted through our family foster care system, or how many families stay together through preventative services, or our gender-based anti-violence work, how that's working with the kids in our RAP and early RAP programs, all of that data is vital to me, because that's how I then tell the story. Right. So it does work, it definitely works coming towards me. It only works in the other direction when there's a need and I'm able to fulfill a need. I wouldn't say that the programs are, have their hands out, but that's basically what they do. They have their hands out to me, to look to me, to help them with making this program not just what's on the contract, but above that, bringing in an element of rising ground and our mission and what we try to do above and beyond what the contract states.
Got it. Thank you. Hassan, you go around advising nonprofits and you speak at these panels. What reasons do nonprofits give you for not following your guidance or for not following best practice? Is it always the lack of resources, or are there other mitigating factors?
Thank you. Thank you for asking, Jeremy. And I'll say, I think the latter, and I think you said it best. It's not that nonprofit, their management teams, their boards are not amenable to our insights or our advice. It's more so just the availability of resources. And I say resources, not just the hardware and software, that we don't have a certain tool to do a certain task, or we don't have the right software, don't have enough space, so on and so forth. It's more so the fact that, do we really have the necessary expertise in-house? So it's more a staff concern. And even if we do, because nonprofits have gone upstream in their talent acquisition, pay more, get the right talent in, but then availability of time remains a concern, right? I mean, there's only so much a CIO with a team of 3 can do when you're trying to juggle the latest and greatest regulation that is now germane to that institution, your cyber insurer saying, hey, we're going to increase your premiums if we don't see a disaster recovery plan or business continuity plan that's enforced at your organization, or there's a potential breach like what you had mentioned earlier, Jeremy, and all hands on deck, right? It's been 4 months, the breach happened 4 months ago, but we're still trying to tackle the ramifications of that breach. I feel it's not, once again, it's not that they're not amenable to the best practices. I think it's truly a function of how do we juggle? What are we prioritizing? It remains the concern. Tone from the top remains critical. Senior management teams, the board, they may find worth in tackling a certain initiative more so than the other. While both of them may have equal merit, there's some picking and choosing. Tone from the top is extremely critical. The best way, and once again, right, it's always good to share any recommendations to tackle this. I feel having an internal IT steering committee is extremely beneficial. What that does is it says that, yep, there's these 11 risks. Let's tackle them in the next 1 to 3 years. So we have a time horizon. Let's plan this out and let's take it one step at a time, versus trying to, boil the ocean and go after everything that really doesn't necessarily give you the right results. So every nonprofit, mission focused, trying to do the right thing. I think as long as we can prioritize appropriately and expend our resources adequately, we'll be in good shape.
I like the analogy of boiling the ocean, but let me put you on the spot here 1 second before we go to David. What about multi-factor authentication in today's environment?
Extremely critical. If we were, that 1, 2, 3 year horizon that I spoke about, Jeremy, I feel MFA, multi-factor authentication, is probably one of the easiest things to tackle when it comes to cyber risk and information security risk. There's so many, our firm, we use a tool called Duo. And I feel Duo does a great job, right? I'll authenticate to my laptop when, I'm in the office today, but I could be working from home or working from the Bahamas, what have you. But I can, I have good security when I'm in the office. But if I'm sitting on the beach in the Bahamas, that's where that MFA, that Duo really kicks in, because I'm on a public Wi-Fi, I'm on a public network. My firm's information and inherently my client's information could be susceptible to these risks. That's where a tool like, and I'm not promoting Duo here. I'm only saying that because that's what we as a firm use. But Duo kicks in, and we now have another layer of security before we give anyone access to our information. So MFA, Jeremy, in the 1 to 3 year horizon is month 1.
Thank you. That was important. We're not promoting any one product. Children's Village uses Okta to do the same thing. So
wonderful.
Got it. David, I think we set you up for this question.
Yep.
when clients come to you, do they come to you when everything has failed and they're in absolute crisis? Or do more of them come to you planfully saying, David, we need to transition into something better. Can you help us plan and map this out for us? How does this work, especially with nonprofits? When do you get?
So I would say, I would say yes. Yes to both. And so, and I guess it comes back to what we were talking about some of the best practices and so forth. And so there's an old expression, what gets measured gets managed. But what's also sort of under the cover is not everything that is measured should be managed. And not everything, so a lot of people don't even know what metrics they should be managing. And so, but they got metrics for them. And so it's really kind of finding the metrics that matter to the nonprofit. And so one of the things that we have and we can bring to the table for nonprofits, and we work with fairly small ones to very large ones, and they all have different IT issues, and some of them can't even. There's really not even enough people to form an IT steering committee. So and in reality, but one of the things we bring to the table is some benchmark data around their operations, and any kind of metric or change management you want to implement, in fact, is going to impact people, processes, and technology. It's part of the whole process. And, whether it was, so we'll look at things like their funding efficiencies. And we'll be able to, because we've done it before for so many different clients, we have a database that we can look at. And we could say that your nonprofit, based on your size and the type of social services you're offering, here's how you stack up in funding efficiencies or DSOs or whatever the metric is. And we can look at their operations efficiencies and we can highlight to them where they can use improvement. So it's a continuous operational excellence improvement process. And yes, it'll involve some digitalization. And so, yes, they come to us. Initially, it may be for a crisis or whatever the case may be. But then once they're on board with us, every year we do kind of an annual review, and we utilize and we come in and we look at their operations and we understand how they're and look at their people processes, and we look at the associated technology on how they're utilizing that, and we look for ways to improve what they're doing today, how they can drive that. So it's an integration of best practices with the different technologies. But they come to us, like you say, sometimes they come, help me. And sometimes, they're like, hey, what do you got? Let me let you in the door. Let's do a study. Let's do an analysis. And there's actually a study that we did with a vendor called Sage. It was and we got about 500 nonprofits. And it was really looking at similar topic we're talking about here is technology trends. And some of the problems that that we found as part of a report was, there was a lack of process automation and organizational efficiencies. There was inefficiencies and delays due to multiple disparate systems, which ties back to lack of integration. There was manual time-consuming reporting and, coming from different systems. And then there's a lack of real-time visibility and analytics and inability to measure performance metrics and outcomes. And so these all tie back from a technology perspective to things like integration, collaboration, predictive analytics, not just analytics and reporting, but how do I drive more efficient based on certain data elements? How do I drive downstream workflow processes? And how do I improve my efficiencies within my organization, whether it be on the front end of the business, collecting and donating, donor management, or the back end. So there's different technologies and security and mobile device management, and there's a whole host of security tools and technologies out there that we could be leveraging on the security side. But that's only one aspect on driving the business or securing the business and mitigating risk.
Okay, we'll come back to kind of catch up on some of that. Alderman, I want to ask you a question. when we spoke, you mentioned that you believe in a comprehensive set of tools that typically come within a package, and that you don't see the efficiencies of mixing and matching. Now, the experience, even at a place like Children's Village, where I tend to think that we have learned our lesson and we have some technology and we made some investments, is that we do have some mixing and matching. Can you walk us through your thinking? Why do you believe in that efficiency, and what do you see coming from it?
Sure. I think there are a couple things. One, just to play off what we talk about security. I mean, that alone is a huge issue. If you're using one software technology, then you have one vendor who's keeping your data and who is managing the back end for you. When you start mixing and matching, then your emails are over in one software and your addresses are in another software, and maybe some of your peer-to-peer giving is in another software. So now you've got 3 different places that there is a chance for something to go wrong. I'm also, and this is, I don't know, it's maybe kind of funny, but I like somebody I can scream at. So I like having somebody I can call on the phone and say, what are you doing? Why didn't this happen? I like having someone who, we're a Blackbaud office, and they did have a data problem about 1.5 years ago. So I want somebody who is freaked out that they are going to lose clients and will provide to me assurances and let me know how this is all going to go, so I can go to our council, and then we will come up with a plan for how we tell our donors, or if we tell our donors what's going on. You know, so I think that sometimes we don't, and in the same vein, many times we purchase a software package, and then we don't really delve into it. We save money by not buying the customer support. We save a little money by not buying the training. Okay, well, so if you don't know how to use it and you have no one to call when something goes wrong, of course it doesn't work for you. And then we throw up our hands and say, well, I'm going to put everything in MailChimp instead. The other thing that's really important, and we mentioned this when you and I were talking earlier, is in this day and age, the expectation of our donor is that all of this data is in one place, and that when they get a letter from me or from our CEO, certainly it's got the right names in it. It refers to them in the right way. It knows how many, it references things in their lives. It does things that, in personal letters. So I think it's really important to have a place where all of that information can be kept. And with the pandemic, we found that it was even more important to have some place that was hosted, and that no matter where you were in the world, unfortunately, I have not been on the beach in the Bahamas, but maybe someday, you can pull the data you need. One perfect example is we were doing the 990 in the middle of the pandemic. If I couldn't pull all the data that I needed for my part of the 990, we couldn't get it, we wouldn't be able to get it completed. So that's why I believe in having a software package that you understand, you buy into, and you try to make work. You try to make all of its pieces work for you. They're not going to be perfect. I believe me, I don't like my email as much as I would if I could do everything in another email package, but I can tell you who opened what emails in their records, and I can track more things because it's all in one package.
Got it. Thank you. Let's do some quick questions here, but I want to first, Tali, I want to ask you one question, and then we'll get to some group questions. We are on version 3 of Passport, right? Probably our largest and most complex piece of work. Is it comprehensive? Are we there?
Yes, so we actually are in release 4. We released another release back in June. It was a little bit more, it wasn't as intense as release 3, which most of hearing, but it's coming there. And so what release 4 is doing is set the baseline to bring invoicing and payments into Passport. So what we're doing is we're making it one comprehensive system for the city. And at the same time, we're still maintaining HHS Accelerator financials, right? But slowly but surely, we're trying to sunset HHS Accelerator and bring everything into one portal to, again, emphasize the need for a streamlined end-to-end portal in the city. And so that nonprofits and all businesses, regardless of your status, regardless of, what industry you work in, if you want to do business with the city, if you want to receive contracts and funding from the city to do any sort of procurement, you're going to one place for that, right? And so, as what I mentioned before of us doing, releasing Passport in these different, releases, but also in different levels, are bringing that end to end in a comprehensive way, right? So we had to start with, release one, which brought Vendex online. We all know Vendex, paper, filling out tons of forms. And so we built off of that. So now instead of it just being Vendex, it's getting certified with the city, right? And that's what vendor management in the Passport portal does. And then we built off of it to the next level, right? And now with release 3, we brought in a procurement, but we also brought in contracting. That was something that, we did not do online digitally, not even in human services, where procurement and solicitation was in an online system. The other industries didn't have that. They were doing everything, bids, solicitations, everything was on paper. And so that's what Passport's been doing. And so that's what we're working on. But again, this is massive, right? Like it's more so than just a certain amount of vendors. It's more so than just a certain amount of dollars. Like, the city spends over $20 billion on procurement a year, right? And has, hundreds of thousands of vendors that participate in this procurement process. And so we're getting there, right? We're getting there and we're building and we're learning. And again, speaking to bringing it back to, again, user experience, that's such a big thing. That's such a big part of like what Mox tries to do, the user experience on all sides of the equation. And that's how we learn, what technology do we need? What technology should we improve on? And what is what do our constituents, what do our vendors, what do our providers need out there? What tools do they need to be successful?
Thank you. A question to the panel about innovation. And Hassan, we'll start with you. So here's a question. Are you seeing innovations or promising practices related to technology that could improve the nonprofit sector's technological capacities or improve the end result of the work that we say we do? Is there something that has caught your eye that we need to know about? And the rest of us, be ready.
Yeah, and thank you for that, Jeremy. I'll say that, I'll focus on what has impacted the end product, or the end result, or the mission holistically, which is truly predictive analytics, right? So if you think about data analytics and some of the tools that we use, the principles, the methodology behind it, predictive analytics have helped nonprofits, I feel, more so than anything else. We're now thinking of future. If you have fundraising dollars X in 2021, predictive, given your history, given the trends within the industry, given the donor capacity, 3 years from now, using the right tools, we can identify and somewhat trend to a number that will be close to than what we could have come up with by just, looking at what we have and what we think will be the future. So there's a number of tools that institutions have started using. Tableau seems to be the preferred ones, again, not at all promoting them, but there's free versions that can be used by nonprofits just to get a feel of what these dashboards look like, what predictive analytics could do for them. Trending, dollars coming in, dollars going out, revenue, top line, bottom line. I feel predictive analytics has done a job.
Thank you, David.
No, I agree with that. With predictive analytics is really a key foundation. The next step, and we've seen it, is really prescriptive analytics. It's kind of the next step. Don't tell me, don't just predict what should happen or tell me what's happened based on the past, but prescribe something on how I should solve this issue. And an example which we're all familiar with, most of us use an application called Waze, to get from A to B. And it's really a prescriptive solution, because not only does it predict when you're going to get from point A to point B, it gives you an estimated time of arrival, but it knows that there's a traffic problem up ahead. And it tells you, it prescribes to you to get off this exit and go some other way. And you'll save 7 minutes. And that's the value really of prescriptive analytics. So it's not only looking at specific data on how let's say, donor or program efficiencies or donor management. It can actually prescribe to you which donors to go after. You can see that based on certain conditions or certain events, it can predict that this manager is going to, this donor is going to give you more money, but it doesn't prescribe a method. So it could be prescribing certain downstream processes or downstream actions for you to take. And so there it's kind of driving that initiative. And there's certain tools, and Tableau is kind of an enabler for that. It has certain capabilities on prescriptive, but this whole machine learning and AI and artificial intelligence and all that stuff that's built into these analytics tools these days is a phenomenal tool for nonprofits to leverage, whether they're small or large, whether they're on premise or in the cloud. And so it drives collaboration. It streamlines processes, it drives like some of the issues we're seeing outside nonprofit right now in the supply chain world, the loading, and how do I bring an overload of 100 shipping containers into the Port of Los Angeles? Prescribe me which berths to use. Don't just tell me I got a problem. And so there's some great technologies with analytics that we should all be leveraging in terms of not only the reporting telling me where I've been, but and as we talked about, providing some predictions, but eventually moving to more prescriptive capabilities is really kind of the game changer. And there's a maturity curve on that.
Thank you. Aldervan, seen any innovations that we should keep in mind?
I think the biggest innovation that we should keep in mind is this one that we're on right now. Zoom or Teams or whatever we're using has totally changed our world as far as how we do our jobs, as far as how fundraising is done in many ways. Not being able to meet with people, meeting with people when they're not comfortable being together, as well as it's continued now that people are many times vaccinated and are comfortable. It's like, oh, well, let's just do it this way. So I think that's one thing. It sort of wraps around it. I do agree that we have to become more predictive in how we work with people as our donor numbers are tightening with the change in the tax law, where people who are donating because they want to, not because they're getting a tax deduction. The number of DAFs out there, the family foundation sort of things where they're giving, the money's already there and you just got to somehow get them to write the check. There's a lot of connections you need to make and a lot of things that you need to do to figure out how to move these people along so that they will support the organization at the level you want it to. But I want to just add, please don't forget that this, writing a note on the bottom of something, a wet signature, all of those things mean a huge amount, in this day and age, because we are so automated.
Thank you.
I have a question. Can I add something to that? Because I guess I like the idea of the Zoom platform metaphor, the social interaction metaphor, and kind of the directions that we can take that to, like next generation video kind of platforms and things like Tally, what you're doing with procurement with vendors. Do you ever see this foresee where you're going to be integrating your talent, your procurement system, and embedding it into a platform for video conferencing within for collaboration and workflows. Bringing a whole network together through not just transaction processing going back and forth, but integrating social media into that whole platform of working together in an integrated network. Kind of where just kind of a directional for the video platforms.
Yeah.
What's the next step? How do we integrate these with our business systems?
Sure, but I think we're all in our ways doing that right now. Like taking something like procurement to a digital level, we essentially have taken workflows and we've put them into a fishbowl per se, right? Like for the first time in the city's procurement process, there's visibility from the vendor perspective and from the agency perspective, from the oversight perspective. So while maybe there isn't a camera involved in it, there really is, from a lens, there is a perspective of communicating through a system and through a workflow in a digital platform, right? And so that's where we're taking and using those ideas and leveraging that type of thinking to take, the services that from the ground and then elevating them to the next level, right? And so I think like Passport really was built on that perspective of this whole fishbowl concept of like opening up the things that had no visibility, no transparency in the city, that sort of just like, happened, but you don't know where it happened, right? Or how. And now we're putting it face forward, right? To make it a more streamlined process that's inclusive and exclusive of mutually across the board. So, even in the sense of on the agency side, I could share with Passport, they have something where they can chat with each other. If you're on the vendor side and you're proposing in Passport, you can use the discussion forum, which is like a chat functionality. That's innovative for the city, to be honest.
Right.
Because it's
so that's
taking
kind of
it
where
away.
I was going.
Yeah.
That's kind of where I was going. Like take that chat
in.
to the next level. Like take that chat to a video chat. Hey, we're having an issue with. There's something that we need to resolve. There is an exception. We have a question. Boom.
Mm-hmm.
Just like you're using the chat right now. Pop up a.
Sure. And then
exactly
that's what it is. We took those concepts, but we had to start at a more, basic level, but it's still it's more innovative than it was before, right? And it like allows for it to be in a system that's working across the board, supporting billions of dollars.
Yep.
Right.
Thank you, everyone. We've got 2 minutes. We'll try and end 1 minute early. No questions. So first, a comment about predictive analytics. I agree with all of you. It has its place. The one place it doesn't work is when it comes to human services and the impact on children and families. Because of the history of social injustice in our country, the data set that we start with is so skewed in the wrong direction that to use machine learning to try to figure that out, we're just not ready. We're going to do a lot of damage. So wanted to throw that out there because it's a real issue. We have too many social injustice data points that cannot be extricated from the existing data. Lightning round, one recommendation related to technology from each of you. Tali, you go first.
I think having an openness and a trust that, amongst, getting yourself to an elevated place and, working with partners and collaboration where you can get yourself into conversations about advancement and innovation is a great place to put yourself in, regardless of what position you hold, or if you're on the nonprofit side, or if you're on the city side or whatnot. I think that will really elevate not only your mission and your cause, but really what is it that you're doing today in all facets of your, of your day-to-day.
Thank you. Hassan?
Focusing on governance, risk, and compliance, I would say just be vigilant. assign an internal resource to be top of any emerging risks, any upcoming regulations. On the risk side, it could be your CISO or someone within his or her team. And on the upcoming regulations, anyone from the general counsel, your internal counsel, outside, legal counsel, anyone on the legal side would be a great resource.
Great, thank you. David?
I would say that you should start looking at ways to improve your digital marketing strategy to drive new ways to drive donor growth, funding growth, program efficiencies in this day. Because basically the pandemic and everything else has made us change the way we do in-person processes, in-person events. And so I think that's not really going to go away. I think a lot of it, so I would say, look at those new strategies, look at what other people are doing in terms of your digital marketing outreach and better communications with your existing donors and the agencies that you work with.
Thank you. Last but not the least, Alderman.
I would say know how to use what you got before you go and get something new. Just because it's shiny doesn't mean it's the best.
Thank you, everyone. You're great. We'll do this again one day, I hope.
Perfect. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
Jeremy.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeremy, and the whole panel again for that discussion. And once again, I just want to thank our sponsors, Capel, Barnett, Madelone and Schoenfeld, BDO FMA, BHI, Citron Cooperman, Denham Wolf, GRF CPAs and Advisors, GMT Consulting, Lockton Companies LLC, Marks Paneth, and the Association of Nonprofit Specialists. We have a few upcoming events that I would like to put on everyone's radar. Please join us on Thursday, October 28th at 10 a.m. as we partner with O'Donnell and Associates to present the New York Privacy Act, what to expect and how to avoid that. Registration is free and can be found on our website and in the chat. And please join us along with AARP New York on Thursday, November 4th at 10 a.m. as we sit down with Governor Kathy Hochul and discuss the most important issues for New Yorkers. Registration is free and can be found on our website and in the chat. And also we have one last event that's upcoming on Thursday, November 18th at 1 p.m., our annual virtual government procurement conference. Registration is free and can be found on our website and in the chat. And last but not least, I just want to thank all of you for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy days to join us, to learn a little bit more about nonprofits and how we can address some of the new and old problems that our organizations face. And don't forget, we will be giving out a raffle today to a random audience member. So be sure to be on the lookout for that email for a DoorDash gift card shortly. Hope to see you all at the next webinar. Stay safe and mask up.